Well, good evening, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone in attendance. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Jobs, Economy, Trade and Immigration for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2027. I'd ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. Minister, please introduce the officials who are joining you at the table. My name is Ron Wiebe. I'm the MLA for Grande Prairie Wapiti and the chair of this committee, and we will start at my right.
Good evening. Jason Steffen, MLA for Red Deer South.
Hello everyone, Eric Bouchard, Calgary Lougheed.
Angela Pitts, Airdrie East.
Hello everyone, Chantal DeYoung, MLA for Chestermere Strathmore.
Good evening everyone. Joseph Scow, Minister of Jobs, Economy, Trade and Immigration. I'm joined at the table to my left, my Deputy Minister, Christopher McPherson, and to his left, Andre Revest, Assistant Deputy Minister and Senior Financial Officer. To my right, I have Gosha Chichivekla, Assistant Deputy Minister, and also Noah Becker, Executive Director of Training and Employment Services.
Hello, Lizette Tejada, MLA for Calgary Klein, Shadow Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism.
Good evening, everybody. Peggy Wright, MLA Edmonton Beverly Clearview and Shadow Minister of Labour.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rhiannon Hoyle of Edmonton South, and I'm Shadow Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade.
Good evening, David Shepherd, MLA for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, and we now go to the members participating remotely. When I call your name, please introduce yourselves for the record. Joe Ceci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Ceci, MLA for Calgary Buffalo. Good evening.
Good evening. And Justin Wright is here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. MLA Justin Wright.
Thank you. And I'd now like to note the following substitution for the record. Ms. Pitt for Mr. Van Dyken. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of the meeting can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Members participating remotely are encouraged to turn on your camera while speaking and mute your microphone when not speaking. Remote participants who wish to be placed on the speakers list are asked to email or message the committee clerk, and members in the room should signal the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Honorable members, the main estimates for the Ministry of Jobs, Economy, Trade and Immigration shall be considered for 3 hours. Standing Order 59.01 sets out the process for consideration of the main estimates in the Legislative Policy Committees. Sub-Order 59.016 sets out the speaking rotation for this meeting. Speaking rotation chart is available on the committee's internal website, and hard copies have been provided to the ministry officials at the table. For each segment of the meeting, blocks of speaking time will be combined only if both the minister and the member speaking agree. If debate is exhausted prior to 3 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the time allotted in the main estimates schedule, and the committee will adjourn. Should members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please email or message the committee clerk about this process. With the concurrence of the committee, I will call for a 5-minute break near the midpoint of the meeting. However, the 3-hour clock will continue to run. Does anybody have any opposition to having a break? Seeing none, ministry officials who are present may, at the direction of the minister, address the committee. Ministry officials seated in the gallery, if called upon, have access to the microphones in the gallery area and are asked to please introduce themselves for the record prior to commenting. Pages are available to deliver notes and other materials between the gallery and the table. Attendees in the gallery may not approach the table. Space permitting, however, opposition caucus staff may sit at the table to assist their members. However, members have priority to sit at the table at all times. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise, and individual speaking times will be paused. However, the block of speaking time and the overall 3-hour meeting clock will continue to run. Any written material provided in response to questions raised during the main estimates should be tabled by the minister in the assembly for the benefit of all members. And finally, the committee should have the opportunity to hear both the question and the answer without interruption during estimates debate. Debate flows through the chair at all times, including instances when speaking time is shared between a member and the minister. I would now like to invite the Minister of Jobs, Economy, Trade and Immigration to begin with your opening remarks. You have 10 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased to be here this evening. My name is Joseph Scow, and I am the Minister of Jobs, Economy, Trade, Immigration, and the proud MLA for Cardston. Budget 2026 focuses on what matters most to Albertans, and Jobs, Economy, Trade, Immigration's budget aligns with that principle. A prosperous economy matters to Albertans because it provides opportunities for people and businesses to thrive and reach their full potential. It matters that Alberta has a skilled and resilient labor force that helps grow and diversify the province's economy. In addition to attracting workers, it matters that they work in healthy and safe workplaces and are treated fairly. It matters that immigrants come to Alberta, and when they're here, they remain a key part of Alberta's growth strategy. And it matters that multicultural communities contribute to Alberta's prosperity and to the sense of belonging and connection they help build. For Canada as a whole, economic growth has flatlined, while Alberta has resisted that trend and continues to be an economic engine. Our province outpaces other jurisdictions in job growth, particularly private sector job growth. This is thanks to our province's investment-friendly environment, low taxes, and overall affordability. But Alberta is facing some challenges. While the United States remains our key international trade partner, the current administration is embracing protectionist policies and ever-changing tariff regimes. This means we must expand access to new markets so we are less reliant on any single trading partner. Managing immigration is a challenge as the federal government has recklessly allowed immigration to balloon beyond sustainable levels. This has put pressure on provinces to provide most of the supports that newcomers need, such as healthcare, schools, and housing. Young people across the province are struggling to find work. Unemployment rates for people aged 15 to 24 have been twice that of the provincial average for the past 2 years. I am optimistic that Budget 2026 will support the ministry's efforts to address these challenges and maintain Alberta's economic advantage. For the upcoming fiscal year, the ministry will employ roughly 1,200 staff to undertake our activities. These activities will be financially supported by $422 million in consolidated expense and $5 million in capital investment. As I mentioned a moment ago, the United States is Alberta's largest international trading partner, but there are challenges with that relationship. This is why it's more important than ever to promote trade opportunities and to build access to new markets. One way we do this is by showcasing our province to the world through trade missions. We will continue to build on the success of recent trade missions to Asia, Europe, South America, and the Middle East. Jobs, Economy, Trade, and Immigration will also continue to work with the federal government to make sure Alberta's interests are promoted and protected in international trade agreements. There is potential for new markets closer to home, and our province will continue to be a leader in reducing trade barriers between other provinces and territories. By promoting freer movement of people, goods, and services between all parts of Canada, we can help foster a strong, growing, and diverse economy. Along with expanding markets, attracting investment, and supporting regional economic development ensures that Alberta's economy continues to prosper. The ministry will invest $120 million to support these activities in 26-27, which includes an increase of $27.5 million for the Investment and Growth Fund. The fund is a deal-closing program. Since its launch in 2021, has encouraged capital investment of $1 billion and supported approximately 1,400 permanent jobs. This has been accomplished by leveraging approximately $29 in private investment for every $1 in funding. In addition, as of April 1st, the Invest Alberta Corporation, or IAC, will move to the ministry with $15 million to support efforts to bring more investment into the province. Since 2020, companies involved with regional economic developers and IEC have made 79 investments in the province, valued at more than $28 billion, which are expected to create nearly 39,000 jobs. The ministry will also continue to support regional economic development and small businesses through a variety of programs and initiatives. This includes supporting communities, regions, and economic development organizations with grant programs. It also includes providing small businesses with pathfinding, coaching, and training services, along with the site selector tool, labor market information, and economic dashboards. A skilled and resilient labor force also helps businesses grow and succeed, which in turn creates job opportunities for Albertans. The ministry will invest $112 million in the coming fiscal year for skills and training support programs, workforce development, and labor market information. It's important we keep our young people engaged in the economy and give them hope for their futures. That is why our government will invest $20 million during the next 3 years to focus on youth employment. In 26-27, the ministry has an allocation of $25 million for the federal government, from the federal government to support workers adversely affected by U.S. tariffs. In addition, to help workers find jobs, the ministry helps ensure they are working in healthy and safe workplaces and are being treated fairly. Budget 2026 provides $81 million for education and enforcement of occupational health and safety laws, or OHS, employment standard laws, and providing mediation services to help employers and unions with contract negotiations. OHS education and enforcement programs are offset by revenue from the Workers' Compensation Board, or WCB, which is funded through employer premiums and investment income rather than taxpayers. Budget 2026 also supports the ministry's work to efficiently respond to employment standard complaints, effectively enforce the rules, and protect vulnerable workers from being exploited. The ministry, through transfers from WCB, is allocating $23 million to support the Appeals Commission for Alberta's worker compensation. The Appeals Commission helps ensure injured and ill workers are being treated fairly by the workers' compensation system and receiving the benefits they are entitled to. To further support fairness, $6 million will be provided to the Alberta Labour Relations Board in 26-27 to support its work of ensuring the fair and equitable application of Alberta's labour relation laws. As I mentioned earlier, Alberta's government supports immigrants and believes immigration is a key component to the province's economic growth. Unfortunately, for the past decade, the federal government has recklessly allowed unsustainable levels of immigration and has paid little attention to provincial or regional needs. That is why Alberta's government is seeking more control over immigration. This helps ensure immigration is a net benefit to our province and does not put intense pressure on provincial services such as healthcare and education. We'll have much more to say on that in the weeks ahead. The ministry will continue to implement the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program to attract economic immigrants in occupations that are in demand or entrepreneurs who can start new businesses and create jobs. In addition, the ministry will continue its work to recognize foreign professional credentials and streamline registration processes for professionals from outside Alberta so they can practice here as soon as possible. It's vital that newcomers feel welcome in Alberta and are valued and respected. The ministry does this by working with the Premier's Council on Multiculturalism and providing ethnocultural grants to support and promote various communities and multiculturalism throughout Alberta. Racism has no place in any society, let alone one like Alberta that embraces and promotes multiculturalism. The ministry continues to implement Alberta's Anti-Racism Action Plan to promote systemic barriers to government programs and services and protect vulnerable groups from hate and discrimination. In 26-27, the ministry will invest $36 million to support immigration and multiculturalism, and I wish to acknowledge the efforts of my colleagues, the Associate Minister Mohamed Yassin, on the multiculturalism file. In closing, I wish to acknowledge the outstanding work and support of two other colleagues, Tani Yao, Parliamentary Secretary for Small Business and Northern Development, and as well Jackie Armstrong-Hominick, Parliamentary Secretary for Settlement Services and Ukrainian evacuees, as an advocate for nearly 65,000 people who have fled the Russian invasion and settled here into our province. Budget 2026 focuses on what matters most to Albertans, and I believe the ministry's budget aligns with that principle. Thank you, and I will now take the committee's questions.
Thank you, Minister. We will now begin with the question and answer portion of the meeting. For the first 60 minutes, members of the official oppositions and the minister may speak. Honorable members, you will be able to see the timer for the speaking block both in the committee room and on Microsoft Teams. Question to the member who will speak first. Member Hoyle, would you like to combine your time with a minister?
I would prefer to do block time, please.
Okay, Minister, block time is good.
You know, I was going to look for a combined time, but let's let dangerous people do block time then.
Block time it is. Member, you may start.
Well, thank you, Minister and Chair, and all staff and committee members for being here today, for the immense amount of work that has been put forward here into preparing this budget. You know, Albertans are facing real challenges right now, and we need to come together to protect good-paying jobs and keep people working and maintain a strong quality of life here in Alberta and build a more prosperous province for us all, because better is possible. On page 24 of the fiscal plan, it notes that 2026 is already proving to be another volatile year globally, shaped by fragmented trade environment and ongoing geopolitical instability. And this uncertainty matters for Alberta. The U.S. is our largest trading partner with roughly $188 billion in annual trade. And when disruptions occur, Alberta exporters, workers, and supply chains feel it first. Albertans need confidence in their government and that the government is prepared. So through the chair, can the minister share what is the clear and comprehensive strategy to protect Alberta businesses and jobs from potential U.S. tariff disruptions? What specific funding, programs, or market diversification initiatives are in the budget, and are they designed to help Alberta exporters manage the risk and expand into alternative global markets? And given the scale of Alberta's trade exposure to the U.S., what measurable outcomes has the ministry set to strengthen Alberta's trade resilience so that businesses and workers are less vulnerable to future tariff shocks? Alberta's economy succeeds when we plan ahead and when we protect conditions that allow businesses to grow and workers to succeed. So on page 9 of the strategic plan, it states that the government is securing Alberta's place as a key partner for international trade. So through the chair, can the minister share the plan to ease the pressures that the U.S. tariffs have inevitably placed on small and medium-sized business owners in the province? And how will the ministry support local businesses and entrepreneurs in its procurement plans specifically? On page 105 of the business plan, it states that $149 million is allocated to economic development and trade. Yet, I'm unable to find any regulatory changes related to the reduction of interprovincial trade barriers in the budget. Stats Canada states that barriers to interprovincial trade added about 7% to many costs. Alberta's internal trade grade fell to a B in CFIB's internal trade report card because other jurisdictions advanced reforms while Alberta stalled on introducing mutual recognition legislation. So through the chair, is the minister considering breaking down barriers this year to reduce costs for Albertans? How much of the $149 million, if any, is going to the reduction of interprovincial trade barriers? And to what programs or supports? And how does this ministry plan to measure the success of these initiatives? I also have not seen in the budget any mention of strengthening our internal economy by further getting rid of trade barriers, buying local, plans of working directly with other provinces, and increasing Canadian procurement specifically. So through the chair, can the minister share what is the plan and why is this the case? Alberta previously had the lowest number of Canada Free Trade Agreement exceptions, but now Ontario and the federal government have eliminated all of theirs. So what exceptions is Alberta still maintaining, and why does this government believe they're necessary? On page 21 and 28 of the fiscal plan, the government is projecting $3.2 billion in resource revenue based on an oil price consumption of about approximately $60 US. Budget 2026 also says that the government's goal is economic diversification. At the same time, the business plan does not appear to track indicators like new business formation, entrepreneur participation, and startup survival rates. So if diversification is the goal, through the chair, can the minister explain why there are no KPIs on whether Alberta is producing more entrepreneurs and new businesses? And if the ministry does track this, where are those KPIs in the budget so that Alberta workers and businesses are better protected from future price swings? On page 29 of the fiscal plan, it highlights that there's a downshift in the expectation for oil prices, and that will dampen corporate profits and overall incomes in Alberta. In 2022, 60% of U.S. crude oil imports were sourced from Canada. And while this is lower than tariffs on other Canadian goods, the 10% energy tariff will still have a negative impact on Alberta. So through the chair, what is the minister's plan to continue getting our energy products to market other than the U.S.? And how will this ministry effectively engage the private sector to do this? On page 33 of the fiscal plan, it shows that the government is anticipating that tariffs will result in a continued drag on investment with a gradual increase eventually leading to about $44 billion in nominal investment outside of the oil and gas sector. So through the chair, how does the ministry plan to offset these job losses in oil and gas? Is there a plan for workers who will lose their jobs as a result of these losses? And what transferable jobs will be available if oil and gas jobs decline? Also, what alternative industries can rural Alberta focus on? Industries that do not deplete their valuable land and water resources to respond to the decline of the oil and gas industry. We need a plan to protect small businesses and workers' jobs and families from the impact of tariffs. On page 106 of the business plan, it allocates $94 million to skills and training supports to help individuals get back to work, including initiatives under the Alberta Job Strategy. So through the chair, can the minister share how many clients the program saw? Considering that the ministry made overall cuts to skills and training support by more than 30% in last year's budget, how many Albertans were able to gain employment through this program, and what percentage of Albertans were still employed 12 months after they were hired? We know that small and medium-sized businesses take up a little over 95% of businesses in Alberta and employ hundreds of thousands of Albertans. If we look at page 11 on the fiscal plan, it states that the provincial contingency is back down to $2 billion after it was raised to $4 billion in budget 2025. Albertans deserve to know how the government will be responsibly handling the ongoing uncertainty that will affect our economy. So through the chair, can the minister share how much of the $2 billion contingency is specifically planned to support Alberta's small and medium-sized businesses if tariff or trade disruptions worsen? And which industries does the minister expect will need support first? How much funding in this budget is set aside through the ministry for additional skills training or workforce support, especially when some training investments appear reduced in this budget 2026? On page 103 to 105 of the business plan, it states that performance measures focus on investment attraction, export growth, and labor market indicators. Yet they don't seem to include measures for entrepreneurship ecosystem development, such as founder training, mentorship workshops, and new business formation. So through the chair, can the minister identify the specific program or line item in this budget that provides sustained funding for entrepreneurship ecosystem development across Alberta communities? On page 103, 105 of the business plan, under performance measures framework, if entrepreneurship is the key pathway to economic resilience, Albertans should be able to see measurable outcomes. However, the business plan does not report any indicators such as new business formation rates, entrepreneurship mentorship participation, or business survival rates. So through the chair, can the minister explain why the ministry does not track these core indicators? And how will Albertans know whether Budget 26 is actually producing more entrepreneurs or SMEs? Page 105 of the business plan shows that the ministry plans to connect entrepreneurs to resources that help them start businesses and grow and succeed. Through the chair, can the minister go into further detail about what resources fall under that $149 million allocation listed as supporting initiative for this key objective? And what steps is the ministry taking to collaborate with the Ministry of Service of Alberta to lessen red tape and bureaucratic barriers for new and emerging businesses? On page 105 of the business plan and key objective 1.5, to promote Alberta's trade on the global stage. I know Alberta has key offices in the US, Europe, Middle East, and Africa regions. Can the minister, through the chair, explain how consistently have these offices been able to make connections between small, medium-sized Alberta businesses in international markets?
Thank you, member. We will now go to the minister for his block of answers. Go ahead, Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Member Hoyle, for those questions. These are the kinds of questions that I get on a daily basis as the Jobs, Economy, Trade, Immigration Minister, because Albertans are watching, they're keeping track, and they want to know what are we doing as a government to support businesses, small, medium, and large in this province. And how are those supports going to benefit Albertans when it comes to job creation and opportunities, both now and in the future? And so I've been taking robust notes as I went through, and I suspect I won't have enough time to get through all of them, but that's why we have a 3-hour block time this evening. I'd also like to start before I begin, I do want to acknowledge that I'm sitting here today with a number of my officials, and all this has come together, and the work I do cannot be done without the team that I have. I have a tremendous department who work tirelessly on behalf of Albertans, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them by name very quickly. Mike Jenkins, Executive Director, Executive Operations; Tim Hayson, Executive Director, Employer and Program Services; Ryan Reichel, Executive Director, Evidence, Policy and Governance; Patrick Hominick, Executive Director, Financial Services; Miles Morris, Assistant Deputy Minister; Sylvia Lepke, Assistant Deputy Minister; Brian Doyle, Assistant Deputy Minister; Jennifer Jabs, Assistant Deputy Minister; Lisa Ross Rodriguez, Assistant Deputy Minister; Rob Williams, Director; and Keith Bradley, Acting Chief Executive Officer. That's my team. It's an A team, and I'm grateful for their support. And everything we're going to talk about tonight couldn't happen without them, as well as my ministerial office. So we'll start, Mr. Chair, and through you to the member, when it comes to the talk about protecting Alberta jobs, particularly as we become more exposed through a strained trade relationship with the United States. This has taken a number of us off guard, but we're also prepared because Alberta is used to dealing with adversity, understanding that this province came basically out of difficult circumstances. People came here for the opportunity, certainly didn't come here for the weather, and they made the most of it. So whether it's now or 1905 or somewhere between, we have always faced hardships and we've come out on top. In fact, we've come out stronger. So when it comes to jobs and protections, Mr. Chair, it's important to understand that the largest trading partner we have is the United States. Last year, over $170 billion of goods was exported out of the province. 90% of that went to the United States. That is not going to change in the immediate future. With that said, Mr. Chair, it's important to recognize that even before the new administration took control of the White House, we have always been trying to diversify our trade relationships around the world, understanding that while we are a subnational jurisdiction here in the province of Alberta, we play a big role on the international stage, and that includes trade missions. Building trade relationships in other jurisdictions is something that I do on a regular basis. It's something that my colleagues do regardless of ministry, because it's important for people to know that Alberta is open for business. Now, we all have departments, and departments often go ahead of us. In my own department, we do about 30 or 40 trade missions a year. And that's a lot of trade missions, Mr. Chair. And I can say that I cannot go on all those trade missions. At some point, I need to get home. I'd prefer to stay married. That's an important thing for me to do, and to make sure that my kids don't start referring to me by my first name. But what I can say is these trade missions, we take along businesses in Alberta. And a perfect example, Mr. Chair, is recently we went to Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, Spain. Now, this is one of the biggest tech conferences in the world. And at that conference, we brought 20 businesses with us from Alberta. All who went there, it was either their first time or their 10th or 11th time, all with the intent of building those relationships and expanding new opportunities for them. And we saw tremendous success with those, and I'm sure we can talk about them in a moment. Another example, Mr. Chair, would be last year I went to Abu Dhabi for ADIPEC, and I was impressed, would be an understatement, when I sat in the opening ceremonies and Doug Burgum, who was the Secretary of the Interior, stood up in the opening ceremonies and spoke about the presence of the United States and how they brought 200 businesses from the entire U.S. to that conference. Mr. Chair, Alberta, as a subnational jurisdiction, brought 75 businesses. As I mentioned earlier, we are a big player on the international stage. People know where Alberta is located on the map. Now, we talked a little bit about these trade relationships and getting into internal trade. And it's also important to note that a lot of talk is going on about removing internal trade barriers. It is essential, something Alberta has been talking about for a very long time, at least since we became government in 2019. And we took a lead on this. In fact, most provinces are really just playing catch up. And so I was disappointed to hear the CFIB's grade, not taking into account that much of what the other provinces had done recently, we had already done years ahead of that. Again, another proof point that Alberta is a leader in when it comes to removing trade barriers. But the overarching message here, though, is breaking down these trade barriers is important for Alberta because we must help businesses move goods and services across provincial lines. But that will not fix the strained relationship with the United States. We still need export dollars coming into Canada from the United States. And so it's important. We will continue to work on breaking down these trade barriers. And without breaking privileges here, what I can say is that there is legislation coming forward this spring with regards to the mutual recognition agreement that we have with the other provinces to put us in line with the expectation of meeting those in June. Now, as I just go over some of these notes, it's also important to talk about economic diversification. And I can turn the mic over to my Deputy Minister in just a moment to talk about some of the key performance indicators. But economic diversification is at the heart of my ministry. It's why I have so many Assistant Deputy Ministers who are all working on this to help make sure that we are meeting that goal of finding new markets. We have a rich history, Mr. Chair, one that has proved us, has served us well for a very long time, particularly in the oil and gas sector. And as I see other jurisdictions around the world that are petroleum-based economies, we also need to use that success to leverage future success. So economic diversification, I would believe starts, it's in my mandate letter, of becoming the lead on defense, Mr. Chair. And this is an exciting time for Alberta because we understand that we have an economic regime and we have a tax system and we have a regulatory environment that is conducive to building and advancing the industries of Canada's defense right here in Alberta. And I'll sure have more time to talk about that. But then there was a question specifically about getting those products to market, going back to the conversation about oil and gas. Now, I know that I am the Jedi Minister. I am not the Minister of Energy and Minerals. I would leave that deeper conversation to him, and I know he's been through his committee already. But what I can say is thanks to the diligent work of the Premier and staff and many members of our government, we have been able to sign a historic memorandum of understanding with the federal government to help us get our products to market. We are on the cusp, Mr. Chair, of one of the biggest oil booms in the history of our country, and Alberta is leading the way. And the money that we generate from royalties and those resources is going to continue to help pay for social services, things that we enjoy in this province, but not just ours. Mr. Chair, we pay Canada's bills. That is an important point for this committee to understand, is we pay the bills of many of our neighbors to the east and to the west. And the reality is that we must continue to support our conventional energy sector and the jobs that are created there. These are mortgage paying, grocery buying, sports fee paying jobs, that there is dignity in that work. And so I understand that there may be an interest of some members of the Assembly to move away from traditional energy. But Mr. Chair, that is a backwards way of thinking. Now I have a minute and 17 seconds left of my time, and so what I can say is that when it comes to promoting trade, they asked about the trade offices, and there'll be more time to discuss this. The international trade offices do fall under the Premier and IIR, but with that said, we work very closely with the trade offices because they are the ones on the ground who understand the landscape. So when we go into those markets, we're able to have those connections, those meetings, and those relationships already started. So it's not a cold call, Mr. Chair. We've done a great job and continue to do a great job fostering those relationships, which allow us to find totally new markets that maybe we had not considered 10 years ago. And you know, one would be the brand new office that we opened up in Abu Dhabi. And though there is that area of the world right now is experiencing turmoil as a result of the war in Iran, it is a place that we see as a tremendous trading partner in the future. And as a result of that relationship, in a very short period of time, we were able to turn that relationship into a direct flight from Calgary to Abu Dhabi that is going to service Albertans and members from the UAE for a long time to come.
Thank you, Minister. We will now turn to Member Tejada for the next block of questions. Would you like to block or share time with the Minister?
I'd prefer block.
Block time. Minister, is that okay with you?
Sure.
Continue. Block time. Go ahead, Member.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the Minister and to all of his staff for the work that you're doing and for answering our questions today. So I consider myself incredibly fortunate to work with all of my colleagues here as well, and we'll be focusing on my questions on issues of immigration and multiculturalism. As we often say in this place, we're all treaty people, and that includes immigrants, whether they arrived 6 generations ago or yesterday. Newcomers are our neighbors, contributors to our economy, and are excited about joining in our prosperity. And it is my hope that we recognize our responsibility as well to newcomers and to all Albertans as they integrate and make Alberta their home, as many of our ancestors already have. So on page 35 of the fiscal plan, the government notes that we will see a net decrease in population growth due to drastically reduced numbers of temporary residents. That was a federal decision. They have made quite significant caps on temporary foreign workers and other temporary residents, and this is also reflected in Chart 12. Temporary residents, given the federal changes, industries like tourism, which rely on temporary foreign workers, are likely to face a potential lull in the labor force. Industries like food supply, I think of places like Brooks, Medicine Hat, meat packing plants, restaurants, hospitality, and hotels and smaller centers all depend on temporary foreign workers to keep their businesses open. I can think of a constituent of mine who has a mechanic shop who is quite desperate to have his nomination application processed for an employee. So my question is this, with the caps on temporary foreign workers, what support will this government provide to small businesses should they not be able to fill the positions? And how will the government ensure that these positions are not left unfulfilled? And how is this ministry encouraging Albertans to work in tourism industries, as well as retail and all the other industries that I'd mentioned, to take on these jobs? My second question is around tourist-based regions like Banff, Jasper, Canmore. They like to welcome folks from all over. I think it's a tradition, having lived in Alberta all of my life. I don't know how many of us have met Australians in our trips to Banff and Canmore. They like to welcome sort of broadly folks to work on holiday visas. And I'm interested in the numbers comparatively between temporary workers in Alberta and how many would be working on holiday visas. So if the minister could provide those numbers between what is the amount of temporary workers that we have here versus temporary foreign or the working holiday. So further to this question, the federal government has reduced contract terms for temporary foreign workers to 1 year from 2 years. Many of the small businesses rely on these workers for business continuity. I would say in the smaller centers and the larger, the workers themselves have become part of their community fabric. I would say through the various renewals that happen within any one family, you can have a mixed status family as well. But my question to the minister is, what proportion of the nominations in the AAIP have gone to existing workers who are in that process of renewals who wish to stay? And what will the approach be going forward in terms of renewing folks who have already been here, have been contributing, paying taxes, as temporary foreign workers do pay taxes and contribute to our communities? So number four, one of my other questions here is under outcome 2 in the business plan, relating to ensuring that Alberta has a skilled and resilient workforce. In performance measure 2B, it appears that this government is forecasting a modest increase this year to the AAIP certificates for 2026. But what I'm seeing is a number that is more than double for the coming years. Now, can the minister tell us how they arrived at this much larger number of nominations for the province when the premier's request for 20,000 nominations, I would say last year sometime or maybe the year before, for permanent residents was actually rejected by the federal government, and it was in fact reduced by half to 5,000. And so what we're seeing for this year is about 6,500, I believe, if I look at the charts. So I'm just wondering how they came to that number. I know that there was changes to federal programs. They've just recently announced the temporary resident to permanent resident program, although the information I've received is that AIP would not be included in those numbers. My next question would be that there's been much said by this government about the use of services by temporary residents or people waiting for confirmation of their status. Those are all folks that are legally resident here. Can the minister give us a breakdown of how newcomer resident populations, breakdown by segment, for the coming year, or what they are currently? And I'll just list the segments for the temporary folks. And so that would be temporary foreign workers as defined by IRCC, international students, asylum seekers and protected persons waiting decisions, and family members of permit holders, as well as permanent immigrants. And of the aforementioned groups, can the minister give us a breakdown of what federal monies are received in support for each segment? And I realize that's a lot of information to get, lots of data. So I am wondering if the minister can provide those answers in writing. I'll go on to page 103 of the business plan. The UCP government wants to have more control over what kind of immigrants are welcomed. Now, we've heard repeatedly that it wishes to have only economic immigrants, after proposing that Red Deer have a population of 1 million and that provincial nomination spots be doubled, as I'd mentioned previously, it was 2024, to 20,000. And of course, running a multi-million-dollar, five-year long campaign, Alberta is calling to bring more people to Alberta. So my question around that is, can the minister tell us what criteria they will use to gauge whether someone wants to move to Alberta is or isn't permitted? And additionally, can this minister tell us what supports and programs this government has provided for newcomers who have landed within the last 5 years? Again, it would be great to have that information by segment. And does he have a dollar value by program and how it's distributed? I'd also like to know how much of the supports distributed by this government are actually delivered through federal transfers, and how this would impact revenues received should those federal transfers cease to exist. And also on the business plan, page 106, under key objective 2.2, the stated aim is to enable the province to exercise greater control over economic immigration into Alberta. And I would like the minister to define for us how that greater control is defined in this budget, as we're looking at a 2026 budget. And if it's not in this ministry budget, where else would I be able to see the mechanism whereby Alberta exercises greater control over immigration? And I'd like the minister to confirm for us today if admission of newcomers is still under federal jurisdiction, and if so, what mechanisms they would use. Under key objective 2.3, the government states that it will address gaps in Alberta's labor market through targeted economic immigration, recognition of international credentials, and supports for the retention of international talent. So given recent legislative challenges on the recommendation from the Credential Advisory Council, also moved proudly by the member from Edmonton to Core, and given the higher than average unemployment rate for recent immigrants, how will the success of this particular measure be tracked? On page 150 of estimates, we can see that 14.5 million is being allocated to line 5.3, and it refers to newcomer integration. So last year we saw Bow Valley College end their language instruction for newcomers program. That's the LINK program. I'm sure everyone is aware of a long-standing institution, Bow Valley College, offering those services, has now shut down its language program, and it's left thousands of newcomers who we know want to work and contribute, but the roadblock is really lack of access to language instruction. Can the minister tell us how much of line 5.3 includes English language supports for newcomers? If he wants to specify which groups of newcomers would be able to receive those language supports, that would be great. And I'm wondering if there's any conversations with the federal government to bring back federal funding for these programs. And does any of the cross-ministry work also involve partnerships with education, as we know that that has been a growing concern as well. I'm seeing that many immigrant-serving organizations do job training or partner with post-secondary institutions to retrain newcomers, and I'm wondering what steps this ministry is taking to fund some of those programs so that people can be better able to work.
Thank you, member. We'll now turn it back to the minister for his response.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Member Tahara, for those questions. And again, right on message with what I'm hearing from constituents around Alberta who are interested in what we are doing in the immigration space here in the province. I think it's important to start by laying the foundation of why we're doing what we're doing and taking the approach that we've decided to take. And that is that Alberta has a rapidly expanding labor market, that the demands for labor are changing almost by the day. And this is a result of the tremendous work that we've done as a government to attract investment and make Alberta a conducive climate to expand a business or to start something new, be it for Albertans or entrepreneurs that we discussed in the last segment. With that said, there are instances, and we're finding many instances, where the demands that we have right now cannot be met by the existing workforce, be it students coming out of post-secondaries or those who are already in the workforce. As a result, we have to go out of province to find those workers. Now, the member referenced the Alberta is Calling program, which saw success in attracting people from around Canada, but Alberta is always calling around the world looking for individuals who will come here and help build the economy. Now, it's also important to note, Mr. Chair, that when it comes to immigration, it must be done correctly and in moderation. People like to think all things in moderation. And I would say the same thing, particularly when it comes to immigration. The Premier has tasked me with my mandate letter to use all legal means possible to take control of Alberta's immigration system, understanding that over the last several years, we have seen Alberta's population grow at an unprecedented historic rate that matches really only some developing nations and countries not within North America. One example that I've cited a number of times is that in 2024, Alberta's population grew by 4.4%. Now, for all of those people watching at home, that may not seem like a lot, but it is huge. And the only other jurisdiction around the world that actually had anything similar to that was South Sudan, which had about 4.6%. And my understanding is that was a result of the civil war in Sudan. Now, not to get too deep into geopolitics, but what I can say, Mr. Chair, is that kind of rate of population growth puts tremendous pressure on social services, things like education, healthcare, having enough roads, making sure that we have enough houses for people to live. I mean, could you imagine, Mr. Chair, coming to Alberta this land of opportunity, not having a place to live. That would go from being the Alberta dream to a nightmare. Now, that is why we are looking at taking more control in what we would consider a Quebec style of immigration, as they have a unique relationship with the federal government that allows them to have more control over immigration. The other thing that I would say is we want to make sure that Albertans have the first crack at Alberta jobs. Now, this has been referenced a number of times, Alberta's employment rate, which, as we see, unemployment is going down in this province, and I believe it is directly correlated. In fact, I know that it is directly correlated to the work we've done in incentivizing businesses to hire youth, but also with us creating an environment where more jobs can be created. In fact, the jobs numbers just came out recently that Alberta year over year has created 85,000 jobs, Mr. Speaker. Now, I have heard, I won't name names, but I've heard from some people in the Assembly that Alberta is not doing its part in creating jobs. But I can tell you that without Alberta, Canada would have lost 35,000 jobs, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, over the same amount of time. That is a substantial number. We're talking about the growth of the economy in the entire country, and Alberta is clearly leading the way. But what steps we're taking to make sure that there are opportunities for youth, first, I would say, is the youth hiring incentive. This is a program that I'm very proud of, and I first would love to give credit and should give credit to my predecessor, Matt Jones, who started the work on the youth hiring incentive, understanding that we needed to find a way to de-risk hiring youth in the province. As businesses look at their balance sheet and wonder, okay, how am I going to make payroll? Who can I hire? What opportunities do I have for youth? They have succeeded in this province because of the climate that we've created, because of the work they've done, and it's important on all of us to help train the next phase, the next generation of workers. As a government, we have a role to play in de-risking that training. And so we created the youth hiring incentive that allows government businesses to offset some of the payroll, but after 200 hours for an employee, that employee is able to receive a badge that will go on their LinkedIn profile or their resume that says the skills and the credentials that they have, that what they bring to the workforce. That also tells future employers that this person has the work experience that they need. Now, I've referenced this before myself, but I'll say it again for the committee. I think about my own first job. I took a job at a hardware store in the small town that I grew up in. And I took a job because I wanted to learn more about the tools my grandfather and I were using to do these woodworking projects. I just loved working with my grandfather. But what I really learned at that job, Mr. Chair, was how to show up on time, how to dress clean, how to do my hair, how to communicate with people. And those are the soft skills that the youth today, if they don't get that first employment opportunity, are missing out on. That is critical, Mr. Chair. So that's why we brought in the youth hiring incentive. And this is to fill in some of those labor gaps and give that first employment opportunity. Now, the question was raised about Banff with regards to employees there. And as someone who loves the mountains and goes out there as often as occasion will permit, I have often come in contact with employees from New Zealand and Australia and all over the rest of the world. And it's great to hear their stories, but also understand that they do play a critical role in supporting the tourism sector and the employment sector. So I can say that, we are going to continue to, make sure that we're supporting the tourism sector and the employees that are working there. Now, the question was asked specifically about population and the number of people who are already here gaining access through the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program. And I'm happy to provide the committee with the number that 90% of nominations were issued to temporary foreign workers already living and contributing to Alberta's economy. Of those 6,098 residing in Alberta, 71% were residing within Calgary and Edmonton, and 29% were residing in rural communities outside of these areas. So understanding that, Mr. Chair, looking to fill the labor gaps through temporary foreign workers is a path to citizenship for them, but also it doesn't hurt having experience working in Canada and living here and setting up roots. There was a question, though, about the 14,000, and I must emphasize that this is a projection. The federal government sets the provincial nominee numbers. This is, again, why we want more control over provincial immigration, because we know what Alberta wants. regardless of whatever minister you talk to, we know in our own respective ministries what the demands are on the stakeholders that we serve and the Albertans writ large that we serve. And so 2027, we would love to have a say over 14,000 provincial nominees. We will wait and see how that plays out for us. But what I can say is in 2026, we expect 6,403 nominations, and those nominations will be spread across multiple sectors, Mr. Chair. Looking at some of the notes that I took here, also, focusing on talent that is here, understanding that we also have a role in jobs, economy, trade, immigration to augment the work being done by other ministries. When I talk to stakeholders and Albertans, people ask, what does your ministry entail, and what are some of the things that you do? And it's hard to put it into one sentence because if you draw a Venn diagram, I overlap with a number of my colleagues. And one, of course, is advanced education. The Honorable Miles McDougall, who's doing a tremendous job working with our post-secondaries. And they're collaborating with industry to better understand what they need, what industry needs from post-secondary graduates when they get out of university or get out of college or a trade program. And so we're collaborating with these universities and Minister McDougall so that we can augment the work that they are doing so that when someone graduates a program, they can jump right into the workforce and give meaningful contributions immediately. We're worried about that delta of what people have when they come out versus what they need, and we're trying, excuse me, Mr. Chair, we are trying to close that gap, and we're getting there. But it's a constant struggle because as technology and demands evolve, we need to be staying on top of that, communicate with industry, post-secondary, so they have the curriculum, they have the class spaces, they have the teachers, and then ultimately they're doing the recruiting for these programs to fill the spots, and then when they graduate, contribute to the economy. And I know that my time now has expired.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. We will now go to the official opposition with their final set of questions in this segment. Member Wright, do you want block time or shared time with the minister?
Thank you, Chair. I would prefer block.
Block time? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So through the chair to the minister, ensuring that every worker who heads to their job in the morning returns home safely at the end of the day must remain paramount. This indeed is one of the most essential responsibilities of jobs, economy, trade, and immigration. The commitment requires more than intent. It demands a strong, well-resourced, and well-supported occupational health and safety system. OHS officers must have the training, tools, and capacity they need to carry out their duties effectively, including the ability to collaborate with law enforcement when circumstances require it. Regulations exist for a reason, Chair. They are prescriptive in design. Employers are required to follow them so that the precautionary principle is always front and center in every workplace decision. But choices government makes must err on the side of workers, all Albertans. The bar must be set high because nothing is more important than the safety and well-being of the people who keep our province running. Regarding the business plan, page 110, expenses, safe, fair, and healthy workplaces, along with pages 107 and 108 related to outcome 3. Albertans are healthy and safe at work and treated fairly in the workplace, along with key objectives 3.1 and 3.2, and performance metric 3B, occupational health and safety. On January 13th of this year, there was a workplace fatality at a Suncor oil sands site, and this unfortunately was followed by a second fatality on January 29th, along with an additional worker who was left with serious injuries at a Cenovus work site. 2 deaths and 1 serious injury in the first month of 2026. In 2023, 165 Albertans didn't make it home at the end of the day. In 2024, that number had increased to 203 workers. Of course, workplace fatality rates for 2025 are still in the preliminary stage, but what we do know, based upon previous years, is that the majority of these deaths are as a result of occupational disease, trauma, and motor vehicle collisions. Regardless of that final number for last year, though, even 1 death is a death too many. The January 2026 produced Alberta Overview for 2024 notes that the number of fatalities is increasing, which is, Chair, a disturbing trend. Illness and injury are experiencing a downward trend, and we know the government, education, and health services sectors combined experience higher claim rates than the provincial average, along with sectors, of course, Chair, including construction. I see the number of inspections, re-inspections, and OHS orders have all increased, and that most of those inspections continue to be reactive. So I have a few questions along these lines. Is there a plan to move to ensure most inspections are proactive rather than reactive? And since the number of FTEs noted on page 160 of the fiscal plan doesn't allow for any increase, are there currently enough OHS inspectors with appropriate training to allow for an increase in proactive inspections? What if the minister could explain what steps the ministry might be taking to ensure vulnerable workers currently are protected and that workplace injuries continue to decline? And I'm wondering as well, Chair, what work is ongoing with other ministries to lessen that number of fatalities alongside injuries and illness? And I'm thinking primarily of the 4 new health ministries and education. And as I just mentioned, Chair, those are both areas where we know workers sustain a high injury and illness rate, of course, alongside first responders. And similarly, while I don't see it noted in the annual report this year, Chair, I'm wondering if tickets continue to be issued last year, or if other mechanisms have taken the place of that issuance, particularly in the event of those on-the-spot non-compliance issues that inspectors might note as they're visiting a work site. And if that's the case, how will this work going forward? Are there overall trends, Chair, that inspectors might have noticed and that might inform OHS work plans for the oncoming budget year? If there are trends they've noticed, how will that impact any work that follows? For instance, in the number of presentations, work with new businesses, the plan for proactive versus reactive inspections. This is continuing on OHS, key objective 3.1, and that $81 million figure that was referenced earlier, Chair. Page 46 of the annual report notes that investigations were initiated for 721 reportable incidents, and they call it a considerable increase, Chair, from 2023-24. And I certainly appreciate that this is a number that is partially attributed to an increase in reporting requirements. Charges related 18 cases, convictions resulted in some monetary fines, and creative sentencing, Chair, was initiated 10 times. I'm wondering what trends are Ministry OHS staff noticing in terms of reportable incidents? Are there perhaps some specific sectors that might require more attention, Chair, than in past years? And does this align at all with WCB injury and illness statistics? Further, while I recognize that not every workplace fatality is caused by employer negligence, given those cases where there were charges laid, was there consideration given to applying the Westray Law MOU that was established in 2017 in any of those cases? Are there plans, should a police investigation occur and a determination that criminal prosecution be necessary in the case of negligence or fatality, for the Westray Law to be utilized at all during the current budget year or subsequent years? If not, under what circumstances might that occur? Is this perhaps a case of needing additional training for OHS investigators? And Chair, I'm still referencing page 107 of the business plan, outcome 3, key objectives 3.1 and 3.2. In September 2025, a fatality inquiry report with recommendations was released in the death of Deborah Onwu. 4 recommendations came out of that report, which was forwarded to the Minister of Justice. 3 recommendations, Chair, are directly related to the work of this ministry and the protections afforded workers through occupational health and safety. And as a result, those recommendations, if they are implemented, may impact the 2026-27 budget. The first recommendation involved making it obligatory for agencies engaged in transferring care of at-risk youth and or young adults to share critical information. The second recommendation would make it obligatory for employers in such cases to implement procedures that would ensure workers are made aware of a client's history and changes in behavior related to violence and or harassment. And the fourth recommendation, having to do with the work of this ministry, Chair, involves exploring the viability of developing such comprehensive OHS standards specific to this particular sector, which I believe would be Children and Family Services. But all of the recommendations suggested by the judge who was running that requiree would involve amendments to current OHS legislation. The OHS code continues to be reviewed through 2026. So what I'm wondering, Chair, is are there additional plans to add the recommendations from that fatality inquiry to that review, perhaps, and then to begin consultation and engagement? Has work begun to separately address the recommendations coming out of that fatality report? If not, would there be a plan to do so? If yes, which stakeholders have been consulted so far? What's the plan going forward? What role might industry, unions, nonprofits, folks like the Workers Resource Center, the Workers Health Center, post-secondary institutions, and others, such as the Institute for Work and Health, play in terms of evidence-based decision-making in the addressing of those 3 recommendations? Would this possibly, Chair, be something that occupational health and safety specialized professional services might be able to address? I note that in the 24-25 annual report, it says that this division can support OHS program delivered with technical and subject matter expertise, in particular for complex investigations and inspections. And I also see that they can also provide support for legislation development. Could there potentially be additional dollars assigned to OHS inspectors or safety specialized professional services and their work in the absence of any changes to, at the very least, Chair, allow for additional proactive and inspections for this particular sector? And finally, and I know it's a lot of questions, I apologize, how much of that $81 million noted earlier is likely to be apportioned specifically to occupational health and safety initiatives, including any application of fatality inquiry recommendations? And for the last minute, this is related to employment standards, and since there's an allocation there as well for this particular ministry. The Employment Standards Code, of course, sets out minimum employment rules, and the work that departmental staff does on behalf of Albertans is paramount, and having had family members who have accessed the services, I very much appreciate their work. But I'm wondering about that, that portion, that metric of timely complaint resolution, which talks to the issue of a fair workplace. We know that officers work to resolve complaints in a timely manner. They focus on voluntary resolution, high-quality administrative fair investigations. And I'm wondering, first of all, what performance measures are used to ensure this, to ensure what is fair and what is balanced, so that the if it's sort of that 50-50 employer-employee, or if it's maybe 70-30 kind of a thing, employee-employer, that sort of thing. And I'm also wondering, would that be the sole metric utilized for employment standards work? And since we also know complaint volumes have increased, are staff thinking this is a result of increased prevalence of issues combined with simply a greater awareness? Almost got it in.
Member. We'll now go back to the Minister for the answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's important to start off by telling the member to never apologize for asking so many questions. These are important questions to her constituents, important questions to Albertans, and I would never stand in the way or criticize anyone for trying to do their job or trying to earn. So, certainly never apologize for that. A lot of great questions here, Mr. Chair, and I hope to get to some of them. I know I won't be able to get to all of them, and if possible, I can try to provide information later on. But the line of questioning began with an important statement, which is everybody wants to go to work in the morning or whenever they go to work and come home safe. That's our objective, both if you're an employer or us here in the elected or the department side, is ensuring that we have safe and healthy work environments here in the province. That is why, as noted, we have committed, among occupational health and safety, an increase from $57 million in 2025-26 to $62,633,000, and employment standards has gone up as well. It's an increase from $13,779,000 to $15,795,000. Understanding that this money is specifically geared towards making sure that we have strong employment standards and occupational health and safety. Now, there is a lot to go over here, and I will ask some of my department staff to step in a moment, but I'll read through some of the things because you had touched on some points. First is that from April 1st of 2025 to January 31st of 2026, we had 15,775 orders written. So So this is an increase of 38% compared to the same period in the previous year. In that time frame also, there were 406 tickets written, 126 to employers, 48 to supervisors, and 232 to workers. This is an increase of 1,100, an increase of 1,169% compared to the same period in the previous year. Also, there were 150 administrative penalties issued. This is an increase of 295% compared to the same year. Investigations were initiated for 658 reportable incidents, including traumatic incidents and fatalities. And this is an increase of 11% when compared to the same period in the previous fiscal year. I would also say that developed in 2018-2019, the Prevention Initiative clarifies priorities for the OH&S system based on evidence and consultation with all players in the system. And the goal of the Prevention Initiative is to work with employers and workers to create a means to better identify areas that require provincial OHS attention among all stakeholders. The initiative focuses on 3 priority injury and disease, including musculoskeletal disorders due to repetitive use, overexertion and heavy lifting, slips, trips, and falls, and psychological hazards, including workplace violence, harassment, and mental health. And additionally, other jurisdictions have requested information on the initiative and interactions on programs, outreach, engagement, and collaboration have occurred and are planned as regular meetings to continue for the foreseeable future, with such meetings already occurring on a regular basis with WorkSafe BC, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and New Brunswick. And also, as part of the Prevention Initiative outreach activities and the focus on small and medium businesses as a priority audience, a small business summer student program was developed and ran from May to August 2025. Approximately 330 small businesses in Edmonton and Calgary's downtown cores were visited to deliver Prevention Initiative and other OH&S information resources and assess the awareness and of Alberta's OHS requirements. So, Mr. Chair, nearly 80% of those small businesses approached participation in engagements. Nearly half of all workers who engaged with the students did not have awareness of basic OHS requirements. And nearly all of those engaged expressed concern about violence and harassment and hazards. And so, Mr. Chair, the injury and illness statistics in the identified priority areas are reviewed yearly and are analyzed to assess the impacts and effectiveness of the initiative. And the Prevention Initiative annual report outlines the activities and outcomes of the previous year and is posted publicly. And so I know that there's some other questions, particularly about the Wesley and Onbu cases, and I'm going to turn that over to my department to go into detail on those matters.
Thank you, Minister. As the member noted, through you, Chair, as the member noted, with the Westray law, those are decisions that are made by the police of the relevant jurisdiction, and so that's a decision that they make. On the Onwu public fatality inquiry, this was a tragic incident. A fatality inquiry report for the incident was released on September 18th, 2025, and contained recommendations that, as the committee heard, relate to occupational health and safety standards. The department's received the fatality inquiry report, and its recommendations are under review to see if changes are needed to occupational health and safety legislation. Our plan is to engage with key stakeholders such as employers, unions, health and safety associations, and other government departments in the coming months to understand the current industry practices, potential gaps in OHS standards, and explore options to address them. The recommendations made by the fatality inquiry raise complexities that are under the responsibility of other departments and government parties, which is why we need some additional time. We've committed to update the Justice Department on our progress no later than September 30th, 2026. As members of the committee may know, Mr. Chair, the inquiry made 4 recommendations, 3 of which may involve OHS changes to legislation or standards. One of those would be to add provisions to the code to require agencies caring for at-risk youth or young adults to share information about a client's history or threatened committed acts of violence with the next agency when the client is transferred. The receiving agency would then inform workers of the associated hazard. Another one would be to kind of add provisions to the OHS legislation to require employers to implement procedures ensuring workers are aware of a client's violence and harassment-related history and changes in behavior. This includes implementing a mandatory client behavior reporting system to share information on violent and threatening behavior with workers as soon as practicable after an incident. There was also a recommendation to explore the development of a sector-specific OHS standard through recognized standard-setting organization involving balanced representation from all stakeholders, and to incorporate the standard into the OHS code with clear timelines for compliance. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Justice had sent a memorandum to me, which was subsequently posted online asking us to advise whether we accept in principle as a department or do not accept or have a different response to the recommendations and rationale. But as noted, we need some time to do that kind of complex consultation. I will note, Mr. Chair, that the OHS code is something that we review regularly. Alberta's OHS code is evergreen, and so usually we take bites, you know, kind of 3 sections at a time. But this is certainly a priority for us to consider for the coming year. As mentioned, I think all involved recognize that this incident was a real tragedy, and you know, we will be taking it very, very seriously. I will also note, you know, the kind of priority that the government and the minister have placed on OHS and employment standards over the last few years, which is why the budget has increased consistently, as have the number of staff assigned to the OHS part of the Safe, Fair and Healthy Workplace Division.
Well, thank you. That concludes the first portion of questions for the official opposition. We will now move to 20 minutes for the government caucus members and the minister. Member Wright, you're the first up. Would you like to share your time with the minister or block time?
You know, seeing as the minister wanted to go shared time with the last block, I'll do shared if the minister is open to it.
Why, of course.
Excellent. Sharing is caring.
Go ahead, member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the minister. Minister, we're going to talk about one of the, you know, if you're looking from the outside in, arguably one of the more boring topics, but I think it's arguably the best topic in your ministry to talk about, and that's the concierge and pathfinder services. Now, in my riding, we've used, or at least pointed investors down these pathways multiple times, and to quote my colleague from Red Deer South, I think these programs are super duper and important, and I'm extremely proud how they've had an impact on my riding. Over the last 2 years, I've been able to work with you and your predecessor to help developers down the road of construction to make investments, whether it's in aerospace, aviation, and defense, or just the newly minted announced project for my riding, which will see a brand new oil and gas project come back to Medicine Hat, creating over 100 full-time jobs and over 300 construction jobs, producing 18,000 barrels per day of gasoline. With interprovincial fuel solutions. Now, Minister, as mentioned on page 105 of your ministry's business plan, key objective 1.4, it highlights the importance of connecting entrepreneurs and small businesses with the support they need to start, grow, and succeed. The plan notes that the concierge and pathfinder services help businesses navigate government process, access programs, and reduce red tape, all while supporting the valuable impact that they will bring to the Alberta economy. Alberta continues to attract new investors and expand active role in development across our key sectors. These services complement the broader suite of economic development and business support initiatives outlined under Objective 1, helping ensure that Alberta remains a competitive and business-friendly environment. So, Minister, what type of businesses most frequently use these concierge and pathfinder services, and are there particular sectors that rely on them more frequently than others?
Thank you very much for the question, MLA Wright, through you, through the chair to you. As a small business owner yourself, I know you know the importance of a government that works and sees you and understands the contributions that you make to the province. In fact, I know that small businesses make up the vast majority of business in this province and contribute significantly to our economy as job creators and wealth creators. And my objective, and our objective as a government, should always be to create environment where wealth and jobs can be created. Governments don't create wealth. We don't do that. We're not in the business of creating wealth. We're in the business of making that environment that is conducive to job creators like yourself. But to start off with, I think it's important to outline the differences between the concierge service and the Pathfinder services. And so the concierge services supports select large transformational businesses with complex cross-ministry needs and significant industry or policy or intergovernmental implications to ensure a coordinated, focused, and a tailored approach to overcoming barriers to a positive final investment decision. On the other hand, the pathfinding services, it's really sourcing investment-related information. It's facilitating connections to resources and contacts, helping navigate Alberta's investment attraction ecosystem efficiently and seamlessly, and of course, redirecting investment-related inquiries and issues to other government ministries with sector expertise to serve them as required. So it's this idea that we are here to help. We are here to make sure that businesses have the supports that they need, and where necessary, we can remove barriers or work with them. With the concierge service, there's a couple of examples that I will note. Well, there's a lot, but I will note a couple off the top. And one is Lufthansa Technik. So it wasn't that long ago that I was in Calgary with actually a couple of my federal colleagues as well, because this was such a big announcement that WestJet and Lufthansa Technik announced a partnership for an engine manufacturing and repair facility right in Calgary. For those of you who don't know, this was a enormous announcement for us because it continues to advance our interests in the aerospace sector, but it also puts Alberta on the map as a place that companies can send their engines for repair as opposed to having to send it down across the border into the U.S. And I can say that we had very stiff competition when attracting this investment, but we were able to land this investment, and in doing so, we're creating jobs, very high-skilled jobs that we see. In fact, I was toured the facility not long ago, and I think it's a huge win for our province. And when I toured this facility, it really put into perspective how important it is to, again, have the cross-ministry supports and cross-ministry navigation services to help these companies land these projects. Companies need to know that if they bring a project here like Lufthansa Technik, do we have the workforce? Do we have the workforce that's needed to augment what's being done on the ground? Or do we have to find it somewhere else? Do we have the landscape? Do we have the facilities, the infrastructure? And so not all companies know that. So we have a lot of tools and concierge services that help that along the way. Another one would be CAE and WestJet, as they created the Center for Excellence. This is something that, again, I announced, and I credit a lot to my predecessor, Matt Jones, as well, who worked diligently on this. And I was at the announcement, and it was a fantastic opportunity to show that Alberta continues to leverage itself and position itself well as a sector that, or as a jurisdiction that is favorable for aviation and aerospace investment. Now, to be specific, in September of 2025, we made this announcement with Mount Royal University that this is a Alberta Training Center of Excellence in Aviation and Aerospace at the Calgary International Airport. This is creating 25 permanent jobs and 189 temporary jobs, but leveraging Alberta's International Airport, and this is Alberta's $11 million investment into over $400 million in activity over the course of 15 years. What's also important to note is this is going to train more than 6,000 aviation aerospace hubs, 6,000 aviation professionals annually, and strengthening our position as a global aerospace hub. So I know there's a lot to unpack from that. Some may say I'm bragging, but Mr. Chair, to the member and to all members and all those watching, this is a big deal. this is a huge win for the province, and it's one of many that you're going to continue to see Alberta attract to our land.
Well, thank you, Minister, and you kind of set me up for a great topic that I'm extremely passionate about, and that's investment in aerospace, aviation, and defense. In my riding of Cypress Medicine Hat, in the Medicine Hat region, we have a very large, long-standing industry of defense, with CFB Suffield being in our backyard. But it's really evolved over the last, 10 years into an unmanned space with drone technology, whether it is new research and development for counter surveillance, or whether it is in the scape or the landscape of environmental drones that are being used that can capture more sustained atmospheric pressure data. It's super important that we are continuing to build out the defense industry development in Alberta. And, I'm thankful to see the continued investment going on in Medicine Hat. As Albertans, we're proud to contribute to Canadian security and prosperity. With the federal government's recent announcement of defense industry strategy, our province is uniquely positioned to step forward to help strengthen the nation's defense capabilities. Alberta's competitive tax environment, skilled workforce, engineering expertise, and strategic geography give us a natural advantage at a time when Canada is seeking stronger domestic capacity and greater industrial readiness. The 2026 to 2029 Ministry Business Plan recognizes this opportunity under Key Objective 1-2. So, Minister, what has the government done so far to position Alberta as the destination for defense-related investments? We have been selected as part of NATO's Operation Diana, which gives research and development capabilities to the U of A and SAIT. But how is this especially aligning with Key Objectives 1-2? And then what steps will the ministry be taking in this fiscal year to grow Alberta's defense industry collaboration?
Well, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the member again for that fantastic question. And I get very excited about defense, as I do about lots of other topics in this file. But actually, I kind of want to tell a bit of a short story. I often think about one of my first jobs sitting at a desk, and I was at an ad agency, and I started right at the bottom. And it's kind of the time when digital ads were coming out, and I didn't get to touch any of them until one day my boss came to me and said, "Hey, I want you to design an ad for this land developer on a lake." And I thought, I got right to it, and I designed this ad, and it was this beautiful picture of a guy sitting on a dock and looking out in the lake with the sun glistening off the lake. And my headline was, "There's no traffic on the lake." And I thought, that's it. That's the one right there. My first shot at it. It's a great win. Took it to my boss, and he thought, not a bad try, but not the best execution. And he explained to me that in real estate advertising, which is what we were doing, they position market. They talk about spec of homes. They talk about amenities, lot sizes, types of homes, etc. And so I went back and rewrote the ad. And the point of that story is, I reflect on that because I ask myself often, what is Alberta's position? Like, what is our position within Canada? What is our position within North America? And how do we compete against other people in the same sectors? How are we attracting? And when it comes to defense, I think we compete very well, particularly on place. We have an incredible landscape that is conducive to advancements and development in the aerospace technology. And you look at what we have, for example, we have one of the largest military footprints in Canada. And you, of course, through you, Mr. Chair, to the MLA right, you would know this being down in your neck of the woods. We have CFB Cold Lake, we have CFB Suffield, CFB Wainwright, CFB Edmonton, and their associated training areas, weapons ranges, and live fire testing sites. And in fact, as someone who spent a little bit of time in Medicine Hat, where my parents live, I remember driving by, and sometimes you could hear them training off in the distance. It was not a quiet exercise by any stretch of the imagination. The other thing I think we have when it comes to where we position ourselves is proximity to the Central Arctic and the significant operational expertise supporting industry and infrastructure in remote and harsh northern conditions. We are a gateway to the north, and the federal government knows that, and they look at us very seriously as a place to park money as we continue to drive towards meeting our NATO commitments of 5%. And it's all the talk. And in fact, the federal government just released their defense industrialization strategy, which includes hundreds of billions of dollars of money they plan to spend both in direct and infrastructure upgrading to augment our footprint. And this will be the largest military industrialization since the Second World War. And for us, that creates tremendous opportunity, not just to build on Alberta, but also to build a workforce and to expand and create new opportunities in places that we otherwise wouldn't have had them. Places like Cold Lake, new opportunities for infrastructure and healthcare and education and so on and so forth. The other thing I would say is my department just set up an internal portion that is geared specifically towards defense, and I'll turn it over to my deputy minister in just a moment. But what we're focused on is immediately leveraging the federal dollars in defense to bring them here. Because as you can imagine, once someone has set up a facility infrastructure here in Alberta, it's not going anywhere, right? This is not something that just is going to move. So if we can attract that investment and work with defense partners, more companies like CAE out of Montreal, and convince them that Alberta is a place to do more business as they've already started, building that success, we win. Albertans win, and then it attracts a whole new sector, something that the members of the NDP caucus talked about in terms of economic diversification. This is right up that alley, but I will turn it to my deputy minister to expand more on that department.
Thank you, Minister. So to build on that, we've identified several defense subsectors where we think that Alberta has a comparative advantage to other Canadian jurisdictions, kind of based on our existing capabilities and potential for future growth, all of which are aligned with the recently released federal defense industrial strategy. These include remote piloted systems and autonomous platforms, energetics, which is a fancy word for explosives, and then the propellants and munitions casings that kind of go along with them. Testing, evaluation, and trials, to kind of riff on the minister's comments about space. We have plenty of it. Lots of other jurisdictions do not. And so we're able to leverage that to particularly on the testing and evaluation side, and particularly in the air. And then also Arctic and North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD sustainment. Alberta is, in many respects, across multiple industries, the gateway to the north. We've all heard a lot from the federal government about the priority they're placing on, creating defense hubs in the north. And our thesis is that Alberta is the perfect jumping off point for that. To pick up on the minister's reference to how the department operationally is approaching the defense question, he's quite correct. Within our economic strategy and investment group, which is the group that does our major industrial concierge, so the same people who help bring you Dow, et cetera, there's been a subunit of that group that has been created with internal resources to focus on defense. And there's 5 of these individuals, one of whom will be based in Ontario, because that's where the federal money is, and to keep us in constant contact with fast-moving events there. In order of priority, we are looking for first significant infrastructure upgrades on Alberta's 4 bases. There's actually weirdly 5. I learned recently that there's a naval base in Calgary. I was wondering where the ocean was, but it's true, it's there. The second is to insert ourselves into ongoing major procurements. So I think all members, Mr. Chair, will have read about the submarine procurement that is currently underway with Canada. Again, Alberta, it's not like we have coastline, but we do have opportunities from an advanced manufacturing perspective and supply chain perspective to insert ourselves into supply chains, military supply chains now and going forward. The third thing, again, is kind of greenfield opportunities. So this gets back to things like energetics, aerospace, drones, or otherwise known as unmanned flight, et cetera, et cetera. And we believe that we have to, as the minister said, an opportunity to, secure for Alberta the lion's share, or a lion's share of federal industrial spending on defense in the coming years. Thank you.
Well, wonderful news on the defense side of things. I'm going to transition gears here a little bit and quickly cover off the workforce integration services for newcomers, Minister. Albertans know that settlement and immigration services and integration services are essential to helping newcomers enter Alberta's workforce quickly and effectively. And seeing there's only 2 minutes left in this block, on page 108 of the 26 to 29 ministerial budget, there's a $15 million allocation to support workforce integration. Are there small and rural community services in which you'd like to highlight that are helping newcomers transition successfully into the workforce outside of our major centers? And what indicators or performance measures does your department use to evaluate whether these settlement and integration services are effectively helping newcomers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member for that question. Love talking about rural Alberta. I'm a rural Alberta guy. And as such, I understand that and emphasize often that rural Alberta always punches well above its weight and is a huge supporter of this, of Alberta and Canada's economy. Now, the department administers several newcomer integration grants that support services for newcomers in rural Alberta. One example of a highly successful rural initiative is the Enhanced Settlement and Community Services Program. From 22 to 25, the Calgary Catholic Immigration Society supported 4,553 newcomers across Calgary, the Banff and Bow Valley, and Brooks and Newell County by connecting them with information, referrals, housing, employment resources, mental health supports, and community services. And Mr. Chair, these efforts helped newcomers overcome the barriers, build stability, and integrate successfully despite challenges such as high living costs, which you see across the country. This is something that no one is immune to. Limited rural service and complex immigration and employment. And I can tell you that newcomers finding a home in rural Alberta enriches those communities. These are communities that have been around for a very long time, and they love to have new opportunities to learn about their cultures and integrate newcomers into those communities. And so I think a huge applaud should be going to my department and the work they've done with these settlement services, helping newcomers integrate not just in the major city centers, but also in the rural parts of the province.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the government members' first block. And we will now take a 5-minute break and then come back with the NDP caucus. Hello, everyone. We will now move to the second round of questions and responses. The caucus rotation going forward will be the same as the first round, starting with the official opposition, followed by members of the government caucus. However, the speaking times are now reduced to 5 minutes for the duration of the meeting. We will begin the rotation with members of the official oppositions, who will have up to 5 minutes for questions and comments, followed by a response from the minister, who may speak up to 5 minutes. After both individuals have had an opportunity to speak once, we will then move to the next caucus in the rotation. If the member and the minister agree to share time, we will proceed with a 10-minute segment, during which neither member nor the minister may speak for more than 5 minutes at a time. Members are reminded that they may not share any unused portion of their 5 minutes with another member. Member and minister, do you wish to share your time? Member Hoyle.
I would prefer to do blocked, please.
Block time? Minister, are you?
It's been discretion of the member asking the question, so block time it is.
Okay, go ahead, Member Hoyle.
Thank you. So, Minister spoke earlier about the importance of anti-racism work, and we know that people who already face barriers to economic participation are often hit first and hardest, especially when it comes to affordability and job stability. The following questions that I'll be asking I believe apply broadly to many underrepresented groups. However, I'll be focusing on one particular group, as the section I'm about to reference of the business plan specifically references them alone. So on page 104 of the business plan, under multicultural communities contribute to Alberta's prosperity, it notes that the Alberta Anti-Racism Advisory Council works to remove barriers and prevent racism, and the Alberta Black Advisory Council addresses systemic challenges faced by Black Albertans. So through the chair, Minister, can you share what specific key performance indicators is the ministry using to measure whether those systemic barriers are being reduced and removed, and where in the budget 2026 are those KPIs reported, especially since both of these councils have been around for quite a few years, since both 2023 and 2024? And given that the ministry states it's addressing systemic challenges faced by Black Albertans, can the minister provide baseline data showing the current employment, wage, and business ownership gaps for Black Albertans in Alberta, and explain what targets the ministry has set to close those gaps? And if no targets exist, how will the ministry measure that success? Given that Budget 2026 contains KPIs for labor force participation, trade growth, and economic development, through the chair, why does the ministry not include race-based economic indicators to measure whether Black Albertans are benefiting equally from economic growth in Alberta? On page 90 of the fiscal plan, this budget sees a decrease in $38 million in expenses, and $10 million of which can be attributed to the end of the Alberta's Calling program that the government has run since 2022. The government initially launched this program to help reduce the labor shortage in the province, to which we continue to struggle with a labor shortage. Through the chair, can the minister tell us which industries saw the most job uptake because of the Alberta's Calling program? How many people received the Alberta is Calling bonus? How much did the government spend in total since the beginning of the program in 2022, both in advertising and on bonuses? On page 105 of the business plan, it notes a focus to increase trade, support businesses' ability to access new markets, and attract job-creating private investment. Alberta businesses want stability, investment, and a government focused on economic growth. The Edmonton Chamber CEO states that Alberta does not need to leave Canada. Alberta needs to lead Canada by creating jobs, attracting investments, and building long-term prosperity. Both Alberta and Calgary chambers are hearing the same messages, where business leaders are saying they may delay expansion or reconsider investing in Alberta altogether because they do not know where this conversation may go. So when businesses pause investment, jobs pause with them. And the shift in investor confidence could put the effectiveness of Jetty investments at risk. So through the chair, can the minister explain how the ministry will reconcile the government's spending on investment and traction with growing concerns from Alberta businesses of the ongoing pressures that are discouraging companies from expanding or potentially investing in Alberta? Is there a concrete strategy to protect investor confidence? and business certainty. On page 107 of the business plan, outcome 1 states that the ministry works with partners to drive economic growth, support Alberta job creators, and spur Alberta's economic competitiveness and productivity. However, since 2019, when this government came into power 7 years ago, Alberta's had one of the slowest real wage growth nationally. Average hourly wages in Alberta only grow 2.5% in 2025 compared to the national average of 3.6%, and year over year, Albertans pay 2% more in January of 26 for goods and services than in the same month a year ago. Alberta's wage advantage is severely behind, and we're seeing the impacts of this because of wage growth impact buying power. So through the chair, how is the ministry addressing long-term labor market challenges if Alberta wages are not competitive nationally or internationally, and what specific measures are being taken? Minister, what is the plan to ensure Alberta is a competitive place where workers choose to come and stay long-term?
Thank you, member. Go to the minister for his answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the member for that question, or those questions rather. Some really great stuff in there, and I hope to touch on as much as I can. I think it's important to start off by saying that racism has no place in our society, or any society for that matter. Discrimination of any kind is completely unacceptable, and there's always work to be done to ensure that we're a more welcoming province for newcomers or for those who are here, but also making sure that we are removing barriers for all people to create and foster a thriving economy where people feel comfortable setting up businesses, they don't feel like they've been targeted. We've heard recent times, Mr. Chair, and I'll digress briefly, but we've seen recent times of discrimination against certain groups, particularly the Jewish community in Alberta. They have been targeted unnecessarily and mercilessly in many instances, times where synagogues are being shot and members of the Jewish community are being targeted and harassed, and that is unacceptable. And I call on all Albertans to refrain from any form of discrimination because it is unwelcome in this province, and I condemn it in all forms. We're talking about trade growth and the opportunities that we have, Mr. Chair. There are a couple programs that we offer that help us develop and expand our opportunities and show to trading partners that we're open for business. And one would be the Investment and Growth Fund. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have a $27 billion, or million rather, 27 billion would be something else, I'll tell you what. What we could do with that kind of money. But $27 million will be used to help finalize and close deals with large companies and help others expand in the market here. And we've seen great success with those, including things like de Havilland here in Alberta. Now, I know MLA DeYoung would love to talk about this and maybe have some comments, but when we talk about de Havilland, this is a water bomber manufacturing facility happening in Wheatland County. And that member DeYoung, was instrumental in helping the government create relationships and make this happen. And so I want to give that member a lot of credit. But what's happening in this facility is they're going to build water bombers that can be sold around the world, and recent announcements that we bought 5 ourselves. And these, and de Havilland has been a fantastic airplane manufacturer for years, and their water bombers are being used around the world for decades. Also, CGC opened up a new facility, or is opening up a new facility rather, 220,000 square foot wallboard facility, a manufacturing facility in Wheatland County. This is another example of the investment attraction that we put forward through the Investment and Growth Fund. And as I go through my notes here, forgive me as I fumble through all these things, but I want to get to as much as I can. Uncertain times in business. I noted this earlier, but Alberta has seen difficult times in the past, and I would say that businesses that aren't run super well tend to fail in the face of adversity. Good businesses, they can survive these through the difficult times and make it through, and great businesses, they thrive. And history is replete with examples of fantastic businesses that were started in difficult circumstances but are now multinational companies. And as a result of that, they are the ones who are able to continue to hire and expand and create employment opportunities. So as we talk about wage growth, as a government, our job is to create the environment where jobs can be created. and wages will be dictated by the free market, Mr. Speaker. That is such an important point to make to all members of the Assembly and all members of this committee and the millions of people watching at home, that we understand that for us to play a role in the market, it's to get out of the way of businesses so they can thrive. And that's why we have created the Ministry of Red Tape Reduction, which since its inception in 2019, we heard criticism from a number of members of the Assembly and the opposition benches about how this was a gimmick. Mr. Chair, the Red Tape Reduction Ministry since 2019 has saved Albertans and Alberta businesses $3 billion. That is real money being reinvested into their companies, either into wages or into expansion or finding new markets. And so I'm very proud of the work this government has done to remove barriers and effectively get out of the way so businesses can do what they do best, which is create opportunities, employment opportunities, and support families. So I think that this just puts, it's just a small point and a much larger one that Alberta is leading the way when it comes to economic growth.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go to the Government Caucus with Member DeYoung. Would you like to share your time with the Minister?
Minister, I'm good with shared or block, so your choice.
We can do shared time.
Lovely. Well, I'm gonna carry on with something that my colleague from Cypress Medicine Hat was talking about, and that was the defense industry, and just carrying on with that theme. So just referencing page 105 of the business plan, key objective 1.2, it's made very clear there that Alberta is working with partners to maximize investments, and that's both from the Government of Canada and the private sector in defense-related infrastructure and the defense industry. And that commitment, and you were just building on this in your previous answer, it aligns well with the significant aviation and aerospace activity that we've seen across the province, and we've been attracting major investments in areas such as pilot training, aircraft engine servicing, advanced manufacturing and maintenance facilities. And these developments, they support the defense sector, but also really position our province as this emerging hub in a very rapidly expanding global aviation industry. And I think those investments really do complement Alberta's competitive strengths, our skilled workforce, our strong training institutions, our competitive tax environment, and our very strategic position geographically. So, Minister, my question is, how much funding has the provincial government provided to aviation-related investments to date? And how much private sector investment has that support helped attract into Alberta's aviation and aerospace sector?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Member DeYoung. Thank you for that question. And I maybe prematurely gave you all that credit because this is another great time to talk about all the work you've done in the aviation and aerospace sector and how you've been a tremendous champion for the people of your constituency. They are very lucky to have you. The government has put nearly $11 million to drive over $400 million, Mr. Chair, of long-term activity and create 25 permanent jobs and another 189 temporary jobs, and train more than 6,000 aviation professionals annually at the Alberta Training Centre of Excellence for Aviation and Aerospace that I talked about earlier at Calgary International Airport, which was announced by CAE and WestJet not that long ago. This nearly $11 million investment includes over $3.7 million through the Investment and Growth Fund to support CAE's job creation investment. And of course, there's $850,000 for the Aerospace Workforce Development Grant, which is designed to provide training and employment supports to ensure CAE has the skilled workers and the needs to support the Centre of Excellence. Furthermore, we have another $6 million for the Aerospace Innovation Grant to ensure that through Mount Royal University's partnership with CAE and WestJet, that Alberta students can access the Centre of Excellence and build the skills they need for an in-demand occupations in the aviation sector. And if you drive just west of Calgary, kind of by the Springbank Airport, you can see very clearly labeled on the side of the airplane hangar the MRU Aviation facility there. It's quite spectacular. What's important to note here, Mr. Chair, is this continues to build on the position Alberta has, Now, I talked about where we position ourselves among the jurisdictions, and one of those is the land. It's the land we have. Right now, sitting in this room, where you can get to the borders of our city here in Edmonton at some of the most difficult times within 45 minutes. And the same thing within Calgary. You're downtown Calgary, you can get to the border of the city of Calgary in 45 minutes at tops. And that speaks to how we developed our cities, but also how easy it is to navigate that. Compare and contrast that with one of the other major cities around the country, and I won't name names, will just suffice to say they have an absolutely dreadful hockey team. But to get from downtown to the borders of those cities, you're looking at 2 hours. In fact, the Road Builders Association of Ontario released a report in 2024, and it said that the province of Ontario loses nearly $54 billion just in traffic delays. And so you look at Alberta and the way we positioned ourselves, the land. And this land is perfect for innovation and advancements in aerospace, and it's why companies like de Havilland, CAE, and Lufthansa Technik are picking us for places to set up their investment.
Minister, I've got a question on long-term economic impacts, but now that you mentioned de Havilland and Lufthansa, would love to chat a bit more about that. We're very excited in the constituency of Chestermere Strathmore to be host to de Havilland Field and to see the water bombers that are being built to fight wildfires all across the world, but also right here at home, built in Wheatland County. We're very proud of that and thankful to the government and to yourselves in particular for all the great work there and the work that's going to continue. So you talked a bit about Lufthansa earlier and how there's great competition in attracting that investment to Alberta. And so I'm wondering what factors motivated global aviation companies such as de Havilland and Lufthansa to choose Alberta for these major investments, and how do those decisions reflect Alberta's strengths in the aviation and aerospace sector?
Well, great question, and there is so much to go over, but discussing that position, I talked about the land, but another piece is we compete on price, right? I know that it's probably counter to some businesses. You don't compete on price, you compete on service, which we also do, but we do compete on price. We're a low tax jurisdiction. And if I put myself in the shoes of a company like de Havilland, I would say if I'm looking to expand operations and I need to have a facility that's going to be staffed and manned by skilled workers and however many are, those workers have to want to come to Alberta. They have to want to come to that area where the facility is. And again, not to name names, but there are other places that people may not want to work in across the country. I know when I played basketball in university, there were some cities I preferred to visit over others. And so looking at Alberta, one is we have a very low tax jurisdiction. The second is we actively remove barriers. I talked about the Ministry of Red Tape Reduction and the work they've done, and credit to all the ministers of red tape reduction since 2019 and how they've saved billions of dollars for Alberta businesses, understanding that if we're engaging with businesses, proactively learning how we can better support them without having to create more boutique tax cuts or tax credits or what have you, but compete on regulation, we can win. And those are making real measurable differences here in the province. And so targeted government programs also, in addition to the red tape cuts and the tax cuts, we have investments like Investment and Growth Fund, the Alberta Petrochemicals Incentive Program, or APIP as is more commonly known, and the Workforce Development Grants. They help de-risk major capital investments. And in these uncertain economic times, businesses are looking for as much stability as they can find in an unstable world. And we're providing that here in Alberta. And that's why they look at us as a place that they think, hey, if I'm going to expand, if I'm going to park my money somewhere, where's the safest place to do it? And Alberta is the obvious answer.
Just combining two last questions here with the time we've got left. First, Minister, through the chair, what are the long-term economic impacts that the government is anticipating if the aviation and aerospace sector continue to expand, in particular to job creation, skills development, and supply chain growth? And then lastly, how, through the chair, does your ministry's work under key objective 1.2 ensure that the aviation and aerospace growth continue to support Alberta's broader defense sector goals and our long-term economic diversification?
Thank you for the question. Simply put, the long-term impacts of the work we're doing is going to be jobs and economic growth. And that ends up being more revenue generated through taxation in the province. That means more money for things like schools and building more schools, in addition to the billions of dollars we're investing right now and the amount of schools we're already building in the province. That also means being able to bring more doctors into the province. That means being able to hire more nurses and support our healthcare workers, those heroes in the front lines. What I'd also say is, it's going to create more jobs with high salaries. You look at aerospace engineers earn this average salary of $93,000 to $121,000 a year in Alberta. And then you look at the amount of jobs created. Again, 6,000 trained every year at CE Center of Excellence. I visited the de Havilland manufacturing plant in Calgary. That's ultimately going to be moving to Wheatland County, and saw the caliber of workers there. These are happy people, because what makes them happy is the job security they have. Going home at night feeling that they're secure in the work they have, looking their families in the eye and saying, I'm going to continue to put food on this table. We're going to continue to pay our mortgage and our bills because we have stable work here in Alberta, and there'll be lots of stable work for years and years to come.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go back to the official opposition. Member Tejada, would you like to share your time with the Minister?
I prefer block. Thanks.
Block time it is.
All right.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to circle back on a question that I don't believe I received an answer to, and that was the Credential Advisory Council and the removal of Canadian work experience requirement. How will the ministry measure the success, and will they take other recommendations from the council, and if so, which ones? Also, I wanted to circle back on language supports. We know we lost federal funding. I would like to get the answer from the minister if line 5.3 includes language supports for newcomers. That is critical for their success and ability to get jobs. And the other question was around the feds and what conversations this ministry has engaged with the federal government on for that. And just around anti-racism, I'd like us to consider adding a metric to the business plan. It was one that existed in the previous budget, and that was around reports of discrimination and hate crimes. We know that the Alberta Association of Immigrant Serving Agencies released a document outlining safety concerns. I did table that if the minister would like to review it. And in terms of retention, so we've talked a lot about economic immigration, and so we have page 91 of the fiscal plan, $16 million for economic immigration programs, and I would like the minister to specify what those programs are, how they're being allotted. I know that one of the members opposite asked about programming available in rural places. If we could get a breakdown of what that looks like across the province, that would be great. And also what targeted industries will be supported with these programs. Performance metric 4B on page 109 of the business plan refers to an average 5-year immigrant retention rate, but strangely only shows the years between 2014 and 2018. So I understand that the data reflects the percentage of immigrants who've continued to live and work in Alberta 5 years since they landed, and I would like to know why there is not a number for 2019 and 2020, and I would like to know what the retention average was for those years, given that we're actually starting to hear that retention is falling. So we know that from the Canadian Institute of Canadian Citizenship, high-skilled immigrants are leaving at twice the rate of low-skilled workers, and if this government has endeavored to attract more of the economic migrants, I would like to know what they are doing to retain that portion of the population. In terms of grants, so, I was actually going to go back to ASIP, so outcome 4, just asking a few questions here about the numbers remaining fairly flat. I know we've talked a lot about a spike in population. We know that that happened in 23 and 24. The numbers around ASIP have remained fairly flat, and I'd like to understand where that 16,000 is coming from. Are they getting referrals from IRCC? How does that work? And in terms of the grants, so we know that we have anti-racism grants and ethnocultural communities. Previously, we had seen that these were two different sets of grants. So we had ethnocultural community grants and we had anti-racism grants. And I'm wondering if those have now been combined because they were to address racism in the past, but also other ethnocultural events and activities, and to highlight pluralism and inclusivity. So my question around that is, it's $2.5 million worth of grants. Have they been combined, and what metrics are being used to gauge the progress or success of that funding? I had asked previously as well and had not gotten an answer on immigrant serving organizations who do job training and how much of the retraining budget is going to the immigrant serving organizations. The minister had also mentioned youth employment programs, and so I'm particularly interested in that as the mother of a youth. How is that being measured? While I appreciate the use of badges and any efforts that are put into youth employment, I'm wondering if there's ever going to be any progress made on the tiered minimum wage for youth, because I think that is increasingly important, and if the government has considered reinstating anything like the STEP program to promote youth employment.
Thank you, member. Off to the minister for his answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate those questions, all very important issues. And I certainly appreciate the member's concern. And as a parent myself with 3 kids and one who will probably enter in the workforce in the coming years, I understand the importance of having those supports and the pressures that can come with being a young Albertan and trying to find a job. But I'll get to that in a moment. What I would say is, going to the beginning, when we talked about supports and settlement services, it is unfortunate to report that the federal government has announced significant reductions to its newcomer integration funding to settlement organizations across the country. This is a problem that all of us are dealing with, but I would suggest that Alberta is being disproportionately affected. As of the $401 million, the Canada-wide cuts over the next 3 years, Alberta's portion of that is $88.6 million, or 22.1%. So, not to put too fine a point on that, in February of 26, the federal government announced the new settlement funding allocations to the provinces and territories. And previous federal government spending indicated that over the next 3 years of 26, 27, 27, 28, 28, 29, that it'd be $3 billion would be allocated to some organizations across the country. So of that amount, 456 was allocated to Alberta, 15.1%. And the new settlement allocation for newcomers is $2.6 billion over the next 3 years. And of this, $370 million is allocated to Alberta. So, Mr. Chair, you can see that despite Alberta showing some of the fastest growth rates, actually showing the fastest growth rates in the country, and the need for settlement services and supports with the federal government, who ultimately make the decisions of who comes into the country and who does not, one could say we're not getting a fair deal, and that's putting it delicately. What I also say, though, is we do continue to engage with the federal government and my federal counterparts. Regularly, we meet at the federal, provincial, territorial meetings, or FPTs as we call them. I have a number of them as the JEDI minister, a lot of tables that we sit at to discuss everything from immigration to labor to mutual recognition and so on and so forth. And what I continue to make the point about those tables is, if Alberta is going to continue to pay the rest of the country's bills, and if we're going to continue to be the economic driver of Canada, we need to get more attention from the federal government when it comes to services, when it comes to federal from supports. This is part of the fair deal, and I applaud the Premier as often as I can for her work with the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, to get the attention that we think is needed. Now, with the issue of attracting employment here into Alberta, we have what I think is an important piece, the Fair Registrations Practices Act. So once that's in force, the amendments that we've made will prohibit regulatory bodies from requiring Canadian work experience as a condition of registration. It would require them to establish publicly share any work experience criteria used to assess candidates and provide regulation-making authority to set timelines for registration decisions. And together, these measures enhance procedural fairness and support more timely registration outcomes for internationally trained applicants. In short, what this is doing is creating a more fair and transparent process for newcomers so they can better understand the climate, the job climate, and the process climate they're walking into. That's all people are really asking for, is a more consistent plan. And lastly, with regards to minimum wage, we will continue to consult with businesses about this, but in these times that are uncertain, as we've addressed already in this committee on multiple occasions, I don't think it would be prudent for us to put on an increase in minimum wage to the degree or the proportion that the opposition party did when they were in government. It took businesses off guard. They were not prepared for that, and they were forced to make some significant, some impactful business decisions based on what their bottom line would look like. And a lot of businesses actually had to release employees because they couldn't continue to afford the wages. And so it requires continual communication with the business community, something we do on a regular basis.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go back to the Government Caucus with Member Bouchard. Would you like to combine your time with the Minister, share your time, or?
I would love to share my time with the Minister.
I would love that myself.
Okay. There's a lot of love in here. I love
Go
it.
ahead, Member Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Minister. It's an exciting time to be in Alberta, I think. One of the things that excites me is the topic of small business. Page 105 of the Ministry's business plan, key objective 1.4, highlights the essential role that entrepreneurs and small businesses play in Alberta's economic success. Small businesses make up over 95% of Alberta companies and employ 1/3 of the private sector workforce, making them central to job creation, community vitality, and long-term economic growth. With Alberta attracting increasing investment across key sectors, the Ministry's commitment to connecting entrepreneurs with resources, reducing red tape, and supporting business development is more important than ever to ensuring that small businesses can start, grow, and thrive in a competitive environment. To the Minister, through the Chair, what programs in this budget specifically support small businesses and entrepreneurs, particularly those aimed at helping them start, scale, and access the resources identified under Key Objective 1.4?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I want to thank the member for the question, and I also know the member's background includes being a small business owner. And, on a smaller scale myself, I was a small business owner, and I know the pressures that come with being a small business owner. Looking at your balance sheet, looking at your schedule, wondering, are my employees going to come to work tomorrow? Am I going to be able to make payroll? Am I going to be able to cover my costs? Mr. Chair, that is real pressure. That is real pressure that countless Albertans deal with on a daily basis. And so it goes back to the conversation that we had a bit earlier in this committee about consistency and predictability in the business environment. And that is what we strive to create for businesses every day. And so to that member who was a small business owner prior to coming here, I applaud that member for having the guts to put himself out there and create wealth and jobs for this province. Now, Mr. Speaker, the programs we offer is, BizConnect. That is a pathfinding service, and it provides support to Alberta small businesses and entrepreneurs, and it generally helps them grow, helps them expand, and look for new ways to export their products and diversify. And it also serves as a direct line of communication between small businesses and entrepreneurs and the department, helping small businesses navigate services and programs available through over 300 small business organizations. One of the programs I'm I'm proud of all of them that we have because they're making a real difference. But there's one in particular that I would like to highlight, and it's the Alberta Export Expansion Program. I recently met with a number of chambers of commerce who were visiting the legislature, and one of them approached me and they said, you know, I came with you on one of the trade missions, and I was so impressed with the service and the support I received from your department, but also how much information there was available and connections that were available for me on the ground. And what this program does, it helps cover the cost for these businesses going out into new markets looking to expand their trade relationships. So again, this is de-risking the relationship making process, but there are so many small businesses around Alberta that don't know about these programs. And so it's incumbent upon me and my department to continue to spread the word, but we also work with chambers of commerce and we work with other onboarding partners to discuss the concierge services that we offer in the Jobs, Economy, Trade, Immigration Ministry. And so through the AEEP, or Alberta Export Expansion Program, we've helped a number of businesses find business partners, trading partners in new markets they never would have thought possible. And so these are the kinds of supports that we offer small and medium and large sized businesses as they look to expand their footprint within Alberta, but also around the world. It's a big W.
Thanks, Minister. With global tariffs and ongoing economic uncertainty, creating pressures for business owners, small business owners, of course, does this budget include measures designed to help Alberta's small businesses remain competitive and resilient?
Sorry, could the member repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah, so are there measures in this budget designed to help Alberta's small businesses remain competitive and resilient?
Absolutely. You know, we continue to be one of the lowest tax jurisdictions in the country. We have no provincial sales tax, no payroll tax, but Alberta also continues to support small businesses, particularly through periods of economic uncertainty by maintaining this low tax environment. I know that we have heard from members of the legislature saying, what are you doing for small businesses? What are you doing to help support them through these difficult times? And what we are doing is maintaining a competitive tax regime in the province, letting them know that we are not going to increase their corporate taxes by 20 or 40% as a result of these economic as a result of the economic uncertainty. Alberta's small business tax rate is even lower, 2% on the first $500,000 for small businesses. That makes a real difference for those businesses, understanding that as you're just getting started in the market, and you're taking that risk that I had mentioned the member has done himself, that we're not going to go and try to ding you hard on your tax bill because you're just trying to get your feet off the ground, trying to establish yourself, maybe expand a little bit, have a good time. And then, of course, Mr. Speaker, we're also continuing to work with businesses and other industry partners to ensure the business climate supports grow in the future. And so always connecting with businesses, talking to them about what some of the barriers they're facing and how we can remove those barriers or make life easier for them. So I know there's a lot more to say on this, and I'm sure the member has other questions, but Alberta is here for small businesses. We understand who creates the wealth and opportunity in this province, and most importantly, we understand on the government benches that the tax dollars that small businesses pay our salaries. We are their employees. We work for them, and it is our responsibility to be receptive to their feedback and make changes where possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Minister. On page 107 of the Ministry's 2026 to 2029 business plan, Performance Measure 2B highlights the number of nomination certificates issued through the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, AAIP. Excuse me. It notes that Alberta issued 6,741 nominations in 2025, demonstrating the essential role that economic immigration plays in meeting Alberta's labor market needs. In recent weeks, government has emphasized the need for a stronger focus on economic migration, particularly as many communities, including smaller and rural ones, rely on AAIP streams such as rural renewal to address persistent labor shortages. However, Alberta has faced challenges due to reduced provincial nominee allocations from the federal government, which directly limits the number of workers Alberta can bring in to support local employers, community sustainability, and economic growth. Minister, through the chair, how does the number of AAIP nominees Alberta receives compare to the allocations provided to other provinces and territories across the country?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll be quick here as my time is limited, but historically Alberta's provincial nominee program allocations tend to be higher than other provinces and territories, but lower than the largest provinces such as Ontario. And Quebec is the only province that can make decisions on the levels of immigration they want to receive each year based on their labor market needs. That part about the Quebec piece is what we are trying to achieve here in Alberta. Understanding that we have in 2025 6,741 nominees, we would like to have more control over those nominees and more allocations, because we will set the kind of labor market or the kind of segments that we need to be fulfilled within those nominees. At a very high level, Alberta wants to attract economic migrants who will help build the economy. Our projected number, our target number is 65%. But if I want to take it up to 100,000 feet, figuratively speaking, we want producers. Like, there is no nation, there is no subnational jurisdiction, there is no business on the planet that ever thrived or got rich or did well or even survived as being a consumer. You must be a producer. And Alberta has been a net producer for decades. And we will continue to be a net producer within Confederation, because we understand that, again, point I made before, Alberta pays Canada's bills. But that is why we want more control over provincial migration, or immigration rather, because we know the producers that we need to attract here to keep Alberta as the place to, as the most desirable jurisdiction in which to live and to work. And so, at a high level, it's about bringing in producers. That's who we want.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now go back to the official opposition. Member Wright, would you like to share your time with the minister or block time?
Block time, please. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Block time. Go ahead, member.
Thank you very much, Chair. And through you to the Minister, I'm going to back up again and go back to kind of where I left off in employment standards. Outcome 3, page 107 of the business plan, key objective 3.2. That idea that employment standards code sets out the minimum employment rules that apply to most workplaces in Alberta. They are designed to protect employees and promote fair treatment in the workplace. And of course, they apply to the majority of employers and employees in the province. The standards that they deal with could include a minimum wage, overtime, vacation pay, general holiday pay. Specifically in terms of the timely complaint resolution, which I noted was on page 48 of the annual report, and it speaks to that issue of a fair workplace. That report tells us that officers work to resolve complaints in a timely manner, focusing on voluntary resolution through high-quality, administratively fair investigations. The annual report also notes that complex investigations, Chair, require additional time and resources, but that through it all, officers must ensure in all cases that investigations are thorough, of high quality, and fair to all parties. So, a couple of questions here. I'm wondering what performance measures will be used to ensure this, and again, what's the balance between employee and employer? Page 48 of that annual report included a chart based upon timely complaint resolutions, and I'm wondering if that is indeed the sole metric utilized for employment standards work, and if indeed it is there any way at all to measure what high quality administrative fair investigations might be sort of in a more qualitative manner? We know that complaint volumes have increased year over year. So obviously something is happening on Alberta job sites with that increase in complaint volumes. So I'm wondering if employment standards staff are thinking it's a result of the increased prevalence of issues combined with a greater awareness of the complaint process. And so I'm wondering if there have been any surveys, engagement sessions, or consultations with staff to derive data on this particular topic. Last year, 5,008 complaints were received. And given this uptick in complaints received and changes made to completion of a complaint from start to finish, I'm wondering, is it possible that there might be a bit of an over focus on timeline over complexity or individuality of a complaint? I note operational efficiencies is mentioned as one reason, Chair. So I'm hoping that the minister could explain what's meant by that in terms of service to employees who are making those complaints. We've been speaking to some external organizations, and they are noticing a trend of encouraging folks to accept lower amounts than they might otherwise be eligible for, concerning issues, things like termination pay, for example. And I'm wondering if this is occurring. And again, I cannot state enough that I do know, of course, that all the folks in the department work as hard as they can in service to Albertans, but could this perhaps be an unintended consequence of a focus on completion within specific timelines? There was a marked decrease in the number of complaint-related inspections last year, 117, as compared to 311 in the year previous. And in the annual report, it stated that this is representative of a program delivery focus on reactive complaint volume and not proactive inspection work, which has resulted in decreasing file inventory levels. And so I'm hoping the minister can really clarify for me what that means, because it does seem as if there's been a bit of a change in approach there. And then moving on to the time I have left. Still on outcome 3, page 107 of the business plan. But I'm moving the subject now to suspected human trafficking. We know that there are issues throughout the province, both with those who might be temporary foreign workers, as well as those who find themselves to be undocumented. They are working and living often in very unsafe conditions. They're working for folks who are involved in these illegal and unethical employment practices. And I understand this isn't always about undocumented workers, but it's certainly almost always is about a place where it's about the bottom line and, unfortunately, the cheapest way forward. There are implications for workers, of course. There's implications in terms of their safety. There's also implications just in terms of their how they're feeling. That idea of psychological, of course, as well as physical. Sometimes extraordinarily serious physical injuries that can indeed be life-changing. So I'm wondering if there are plans to update OHS regulations to allow for some greater oversight and penalties. Does the ministry have plans to review procurement policies to ensure that the policies and procedures which presently exist are actually being followed? Are there plans to work with infrastructure to ensure community benefits clauses, increase codes of conduct for procurement?
Back to you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member for all those questions. I will do my earnest to touch on most of them, but I think I want to start actually with the end in mind, and that's talking about the potential of human trafficking within the Alberta workforce. I think we do a lot of work to monitor the companies that have workers here in this province who are coming from out of country. We are proactive in that, but there's also organizations like Not in My City that do tremendous work to activate awareness about human trafficking in the province. And one in particular person who I think deserves a ton of credit is Paul Brandt. He's one heck of a musician, but he's an even better person for taking this on, using his platform for good to draw attention to this. On another level, Alberta needs to maintain a reputation as being a premier destination to work for those coming from out of country. So reputation management is important for us. And so if someone was to come to Alberta temporarily as a foreign worker or as a provincial nominee, we don't want them to come here only to land in a toxic work environment, because that would rob them of dignity, both dignity of their work and dignity of lifestyle and their values. And so it's top of mind for me as the minister, and of course for my department, to proactively engage with businesses and to make sure that they are engaging in ethical hiring and labor practices. And I do want to turn my department here to talk about the caliber of the investigations they do, the employment standard staff that are employed, the operational experiences and the oversight and the penalties. And there's limited time, so I will give it to them so they can give you some more specific answers through you, Mr. Chair, to MLA Wright on that.
Thank you, Minister. So, Jobs, Economy, Trade, Immigration is a member of a working group led by Public Safety and Emergency Services that supports implementing the recommendations submitted by the Human Trafficking Task Force. Our employment standards staff have received specific human trafficking training related to the identification of trends and victim support. Our Special Investigations and Inspection Unit and the Temporary Foreign Worker Advisory Office, which the Minister just mentioned, work with provincial labor trafficking groups that focus on collaboration, education, prevention, and response. We have an information sharing agreement with Employment Standards Development Canada, which kind of governs the TFW entry into Canada to enable exchange of temporary foreign worker related information that's intended to strengthen protections for victims of human trafficking. All human trafficking related situations Employment Standards has investigated have involved vulnerable foreign workers, and the Temporary Foreign Worker Advisory Office assists vulnerable workers in accessing resources, which may include support specific to human trafficking. I'll just jump to another of the members' questions. There were 4,632 complaints received and 4,154 complaints concluded. Complaint is completed when Employment Standards Program Delivery has finished their investigation into the complaint. The complaint may still be active at appeals or collections, and a complaint is considered concluded when the program delivery has collected money on behalf of the complainant or has exhausted all available options for resolving the complaint, whether it's through voluntary resolution, the issuance of an order or decision, the appeal process, or the conclusion of the collections process. Employment Standards has resolved 95% of complaints within 180 days, which is an improvement of 8% over the 87% in the prior year. The average time for complaints to be resolved was 77 days, a 33% improvement from the previous year. I will note, Mr. Chair, directly to the member's question regarding the kind of offers of settlement. If an employer makes an offer, as an Employment Standards group, we are duty bound to present it unless it's completely unconscionable. Now, and at that point, the kind of decision-making shifts to the person involved. They may get a different result if they decide to follow through the entire process. But, at that point, that's how we come at it. I'll try to jump to another question. Voluntary resolution, we tend to find is a more efficient process and can lead to a fair arrangement that both parties agree to with minimal involvement of an Employment Standards officers. Now, obviously not all situations lend themselves to voluntary resolution.
Thank you. We'll now go back to the Government Caucus. And Member Wright, would you like to share your time with the Minister?
I'd like to do shared time.
Giddy up.
Giddy up. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the Minister. Minister, I had the opportunity to participate as part of Alberta's delegation to PENWAR, which is the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. And it's an organization that was actually helped started by a former MLA from Medicine Hat and former Deputy Premier of Jim Horsman. They look at all things economic in the region of the Northwest, which is 5 U.S. jurisdictions, 5 Canadian jurisdictions. And, when we take a look at defending Alberta's position in international trade negotiations, something that's come up pretty consistently that PENWAR has been really advocating both sides of the border to get a resolution to is the USMCA negotiations that go on. They have the risk of being the single largest increase to cost of living and goods that are currently being negotiated by the federal governments, both sides of the border, and I should say down to Mexico as well. Key Objective 1.6 commits the government to advancing Alberta's interests in negotiations and implementing and management of international trade agreements. Alberta's prosperity depends on reliable access to global markets for our exports, for our agriculture, and for our energy manufacturing and technology. As international trade tensions rise, it becomes more and more important for Alberta to advocate for tariff-free access, stable trade conditions, and strong protections for exporters who drive economic growth. And this became really evident in Alaska, where you know, they're very concerned with this because they're pretty isolated from the continental U.S. And any additional tariffs or fees could see a substantial increase to their total overall cost of living. So how is Alberta defending its interests as agreements like the USMCA approach renewal or renegotiation? And then on top of that, beyond the CUSMA agreement, what other trade agreements or global markets are strategically important for Alberta to get our goods to market? And what tools does the ministry use to ensure Alberta's position is reflected in the federal level trade discussions? And then, you know, just to further on to that point, when we talk about economic growth and access between Alberta and key international destinations, how exactly does the Investment and Growth Fund work? And how will expanding direct international flights out of Alberta help drive job creation and get goods to market in an appropriate time? And how will new direct international connections really showcase Alberta as a place for new export growth to foreign markets? So I'll turn it over to you, Minister, for those pieces.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Chair, through you to the member, thank you for those questions. All very important. And we addressed this a bit earlier in the committee, but we are in uncertain times with our strained relationship, or you could say new relationship, with the United States. And we have always advocated for and will continue to advocate for a tariff-free relationship with the United States. They are our biggest trading partner, and we understand that they're also Canada's top trading partner. So it's essential that we manage this relationship well. And I emphasize the word relationship. While I know that some may take the approach of a scorched earth with the new administration, I guess I shouldn't say new, given that the president's been in office now for a year, but with the Trump administration, the scorched earth approach is one to just cut it off, but that's just not the way to do it. Mr. Chair, we need to have a relationship with our trading partners. It's why members of cabinet and members of the government caucus continue to attend conferences like PennWAR conferences. We build relationships with state and federal legislators, better understanding how we can coordinate and collaborate on future trade agreements. With regards to CUSMA, something that we have worked diligently and will continue to advocate for is that the federal government doesn't negotiate away our rights as a province, particularly when it comes to our largest export, which is energy. This idea that they'd be gambling with Alberta's money is not fair. And we have made this point a number of times. The Premier has made this point that if we're going to be going into CUSMA negotiations, which we are, that we will be all over the federal government so they don't make any mistake that they are not to speak for Alberta, but rather to take the input that we give them and use that through the course of the negotiations. Now, I know that you referenced trade missions, and I had talked about this earlier in the committee conversation, but we do about 30 to 40 in jobs, economy, trade, immigration. Other ministries do a number of them as well. I know Minister Sigurdsson will be leading trade efforts going to China, which is a market that in recent times has not been one that's been overly open to us and receptive, but understanding that some of the largest economies and the largest populations around the world need Alberta, right? The world needs more Alberta. And so we go into those markets, both as a department, but also as elected officials, to send the message that we as a province, we're open for business. So grateful for all the work that our departments do to open those doors for us and keep those doors open as we look for new ways to get Alberta products to foreign markets and attract foreign investment into Alberta. So hopefully that answers your question to the honourable member through you, through the chair to you.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Minister. And through the chair, you know, as I review the ministry's 26-29 business plan, I'm really encouraged to see Alberta continue to lead the way in the country's economic performance, job growth, you know, and strong growth projected in the years ahead as well. Outcome 1 and key objective 1.3 point to the importance of ensuring growth is felt in all parts of the province. And, you know, in my area of the province, we're about 3 hours from anywhere, is one of the jokes we say, because we're 3 hours to Calgary, we're 3 hours to, you know, Maple Creek, or not Maple Creek, that's not right, into Swift Current and Regina and Moose Jaw area. We're 2 hours to the first major location in the States. Rural Alberta is really felt there, and there's great growth coming from the rural side of things. Minister, what targeted programs or initiatives within your ministry specifically support economic development and diversification in rural Alberta or smaller municipalities, and can you highlight any recent regional or rural economic development projects that your ministry has supported through the work with municipalities, Indigenous communities, or economic development organizations? And how does the ministry's regional economic development work to ensure rural communities can participate fully in the job growth that we've continued to see in this province compared to the rest of Canada?
Thank you for the question, and really appreciate you pointing out Medicine Hat. It's a community that does a great job in looking for unique ways to build its economic footprint around the province. They also do a great job across the board. In fact, they even have some great sports teams on the weekend. The Medicine Hat Hawks finished second at the zone final. Second, of course, only to McGrath High School, which where I went to high school. Not like that's a shot or anything, not a competition, just huge kudos to both teams who are doing so well this season, and to look forward to watching their provincials. But that aside, Mr. Chair, through you, we have a number of tools that support economic development in Alberta, in rural Alberta. The Alberta Economic Dashboard and the Regional Economic Dashboard are hubs for information designed to promote investment and business development in Alberta by providing investors and businesses economic developers access to relevant economic data and industry insights. Furthermore, where we have cross-ministry collaboration, I talked about where we compete, we also need to continue to compete on connectivity, be it digital connectivity or physical connectivity. Do we have the roads, the infrastructure to support transportation of goods and services throughout the province? And the answer is yes, but we could always use more. We could always find other ways to develop that infrastructure. But again, I go back to the Investment and Growth Fund. It has incentives to incentivize new investments and also expand existing businesses, not just in urban areas, Mr. Chair, but also in the rural parts of the province, as we cannot forget about those areas. And so in 2025, the IGF, it expanded its designation intake of organizations from 6 to 13, including economic development agencies in our Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Red Deer, and the Grand Prairie region. So as you can see, Fort McMurray, Wood Buffalo. So you can see, Mr. Chair, this is a province-wide, the benefits are being felt by the support of IGF.
Thank you, Minister. We will now go to the official opposition's final segment with Member Ceci on the line. Member, would you like to share your time or block time with the Minister?
Block, Mr. Chairman, be fine. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine. Thank you. You may go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, Minister. As the Shadow Minister for Arts and Culture, I'm here because of the part of your ministry that deals with film and television tax credits in the Alberta Media Fund. On page 90 of the fiscal plan, Jetty's budget narrative, there are 11 words there that have resulted in a significant amount of concern among those in the film industry and have been addressed by the president of IATSE 212, as well as the Hollywood Reporter trade paper. Those words are, this includes $60 million for the film and television tax credit. Those 11 words have caused hundreds and hundreds of words to be written to try and examine and explain what was meant. Where is government going with the FTTC, and how will the lives and livelihoods of film craft people, owners of studios, actors, and technicians all be affected? I'll give you a chance, Minister, shortly to address this, and perhaps you'll give some assurances to those in the film and television industry. But from my read, Alberta is not doing the amount of film and television business production volume-wise it once did. The numbers for FTTC payouts in 2023, 24, 25, and 26 booked for this budget are 26.7 million, 103.3 million, 55.3 million, and 60 million respectively. The 2024 massive bump in FTTC payout was no doubt for The Last of Us, season 1, shot here in 2023. The 60 million in this budget is only 8 or 9% increase from the last year, Minister. My question to you is this the best the government can do in what could be a significant sector to help diversify our economy? Building on the previous question, page 9 of the strategic plan identifies, quote, growing cultural industries to diversify the economy, create jobs, etc. In short, growing the cultural sector is seen as in the Alberta Strategic Plan as a key tool to attract investment. I'm certain both sides of the aisle want even higher production volumes from Alberta filmmakers and from foreign filmmakers and creators. Choosing Alberta to shoot in is directly tied to our tax incentive competitiveness. Will you make the FTTC competitive specifically more than the 22% tax incentive available today? Minister, I'm sure you're aware that at every studio, you've got a bean counter who has a binder on his desk, and it has every jurisdiction in the world and what their tax credit situation is. And on any given project, they'll run 3 or 4 budgets and go wherever it is less expensive. Carrying on, Minister, the Jetty Business Plan notes that every $1 tax credit attracted $4.30 in spend in 24-25. There's no numbers for 25-26 yet, but will your ministry what will your ministry do to attract even higher positive economic returns than the flat targets laid out in the performance measures on that page? Again, regarding priority 1 in the strategic plan regarding attracting investment, Alberta has dropped to 5th place amongst provinces in the list of busiest provinces for motion picture production. Ontario, BC, Manitoba, and probably Quebec are ahead of us in production volume last year, despite Alberta having world-class crews, sets, incredible locations, and world-class infrastructure and facilities. Minister, what's holding back producers and movie scouts from choosing Alberta? A comparative table of global and Canadian film production hub tax incentives shows that Alberta's FTTC is no longer competitive with other jurisdictions. Is your ministry aware of this, and what actions, if any, will be taken to get in the game incentive-wise? I understand that members of Alberta's screen industry have met with your department to request changes that would keep Alberta's film and tax credits competitive. What specific recommendations did they provide, and why aren't those recommendations reflected anywhere in this budget? And your department's business plan performance measure targets 238 million in production expenditure generated through the FTTC. Given that the reduction is an estimated uptake of the FTTC incentives, is this still an achievable target? Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Member Ceci. We'll now go to the Minister for his answers.
Well, thank you to the member for the question and for his diligent work on behalf of the arts community as the critic with the NDP caucus. I understand that we're going to have some differences of opinion, particularly on this line of questioning. Alberta has and will always be a premier destination to shoot films. That's a fact. Advancements in technology in the film sector and television continue to impress me by the day, for whatever my opinions are worth on that, but it is impossible, Mr. Chair, to replicate those beautiful Rocky Mountains or the rolling plains here in Alberta. And if you want to shoot a film that has those pieces in it, you cannot buy that kind of scenery in a production studio. So what I would say is we will continue to work with the film and television sector to understand the needs that they have. With that said, I believe that the funding that we have put towards the film and television tax credit is in line with the demand that we will expect to see in years come, in the future years. For example, in 2021-22, we had $16.4 million of payout. 22-23 was $26.7 million. 23-24 was over 100 million, of course, as mentioned. That was an anomaly, given that that was the year that was filmed The Last of Us, where It's a great production. In fact, they blew up the building just not far, just a stone throw from here where the legislature is. Quite the episode. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. Through you, Mr. Chair, the member Pitt, solid episode. And of course, 24-25 spent 55 million, and 25-26 estimated 44 to 68. So I do believe that the money being allocated to the film and television tax credit is what's needed. Now, the member said in his line of questioning that they'll go where it's less expensive. I would disagree with that. I know that the path of least resistance is sometimes followed, but going back to a point I made earlier, we do have things that you cannot buy or cannot build in a production studio. And so having visited and been in film and television conventions as they were, or award ceremonies and such, I've listened to the production companies and the directors and the producers about what it is that Alberta does well. And one of them was in Banff. And I said, tell me about it. Like, tell me what it is that we do well, that why you come here. And he didn't say a word. He just took his hand and pointed over to the mountains, the beautiful lakes and the scenery that was around them and the wildlife that occurs naturally. So, and then of course to use a quote from Dalen Pierce of the Edmonton-based indie producer and board chair of the Alberta Media Production Industries Association, he said that the 35 million reduction in planned provincial support for the film and television tax credit should not impact local or foreign producers, as it only impacts how much funding Alberta has set aside for its film tax credit program based on fluctuation production levels and payouts for the FTTC in recent years. Quote, there's no actual cut to funding. It's an estimated number, Pierce told the THR. So hopefully that brings some assurance to the film and television industry that Alberta is absolutely still open for business when it comes to shooting these world-renowned productions. It's also a way for us to promote Alberta as a place to visit, both as a tourist or as a place to look to invest. People want to work in places where they want to visit or want to live. And as the former tourism minister, I can speak to a lot of the experiences I've had with tourists who are coming to Alberta and why they come. Usually they'll come on a business trip or they come for a sporting event and ultimately end up staying for a couple extra days and then returning with their families or others to experience more because their time was cut short. And so to end on one of the questions from Mr. Ceci is this the best the government can do? And I would respond by simply saying, losers whine about their best. And Mr. Speaker, on the government side and in Alberta, we succeed.
We will now head to the government side with Member Stefan taking us home. Would you like shared or block time with the minister?
Block is best, but sharing is caring. Let's go sharing. Why not?
You okay with that, minister?
Sharing.
All about it.
Sharing is so good.
Go ahead, member.
Let's talk about outcome one right at the very top. Jobs, economy, trade, and immigration. Works with partners to drive economic growth, support Alberta job creators, and spur Alberta's economic competitiveness and productivity. I just love jobs and economy. I just want, there's a really great stat that just came out over the past year. Alberta added 85,000 jobs, more than 9 times the next closest province, while the rest of Canada lost more than 33,000 jobs. Minister, I think it's really because there's too much NDP in the rest of Canada. But Minister, my question is, why is Alberta the best jurisdiction in Canada to start and grow business, in your opinion? Because we are the best. So why is it that we're so awesome in Alberta at creating jobs?
Well, Mr. Chair, the member just threw the pitch right down the pipe, and I'm about to knock it out of the park. There's so much to talk about with Alberta being an exceptional place to do business. I only have 4 minutes and 10 seconds, but I will succeed in explaining why. First, we're a low-tax jurisdiction. People want to keep more of their hard-earned money in their pockets, and you get to do that in Alberta. This is the place where when you get your paycheck, less of that money's going to the government and more of it's going into your pocket so you can spend that money how you see fit. As conservatives, we believe that you are the best steward of your money, not the government. What I also say is we are a low regulation regime province, Mr. Chair. We understand that removing barriers for businesses to succeed is a key part of what a government should do, which creates the environment for success. Now, I know the member from Red Deer South is a small business owner himself, an account, a bean counter, as some are known, Mr. Speaker. He knows how to count beans, and I can tell you what, I bet he's worked with a lot of clients who understand the pressures that overtaxation, overregulation can have on their business and the success and the effects and the downward effects it can have on the employees that they hire. Creating that uncertainty of, am I gonna have a job next month, or is my company get to lay me off because of some other arbitrary regulation the government has put in place that doesn't actually have a measurable effect on the economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, I can also talk about ambition. This is a province of ambition. I'm a fifth-generation Southern Albertan, and my ancestors came here for opportunity, just like first-generation or second-generation those who came, because they know that this is a province that gets after it. This province gets after the opportunities. We don't just sit on our hands waiting for opportunities to come to us. We seek them out, and we build on past successes. I've talked about the oil and gas sector and how important that is to Alberta, and it will continue to be a significant, if not the most important economic driver of this province. But building on previous successes and creating economic clusters in the province around things like aerospace and defense, around tech and innovation, Mr. Speaker, Alberta is ripe for another boom, and diversification is key. It is central as we as a province continue to expand and see new people coming here. I would also say that we have a skilled workforce. All these projects that I've talked about over the last 3 hours require people, hands-on people to build these projects. We build in Alberta. I go to other jurisdictions and I'm impressed because they don't let unnecessary regulation or over-consultation prohibit them from building railroads, from building airports, from building shipping yards. Mr. Chair, it is impressive. And in Canada, we are limiting our opportunities. We are not reaching the magnitude of our potential because we are over-regulating ourselves. In Alberta, we will not do that. Where possible, we will set our terms for success. And Albertans and other businesses know that. And we will continue to build at a rate that you will not see in any other jurisdiction around the country. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, with the last 50 seconds that I have in this committee, I will simply say to members of the committee, members of the Legislative Assembly, and anyone watching at home, that your government will continue to be focused on doing what's best for you, what builds the economy, what makes your life better. We will continue to attract investment. We will continue to listen and adjust where necessary because we know who we work for. And under the leadership of the Premier Danielle Smith, Cabinet and Government Caucus members, you can count on the thing that when we wake up every morning and we go to bed every night, we ask ourselves a very important question. Have we served the people of Alberta well? Are they better off today than they were the day before? And I can confidently say to Albertans, the answer is yes.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, everybody, for your participation. I must advise the committee, however, that the time allotted for consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. This concludes the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Futures consideration of the 2026-2027 main estimates. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.